The roof beam cracked like a gunshot. Ethan Cole barely had time to shove the woman aside before 200 pounds of waterlogged timber crashed through the ceiling, obliterating the spot where she'd been standing. Rain poured through the gaping wound above them, turning the old house into a sinking ship. The developer's report had called this place structurally unsound. They'd lied. But now, trapped in a collapsing building during the worst storm in a decade, with a terrified stranger whose home was being stolen from under her, Ethan realized the truth didn't matter. Not if they didn't survive the night. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below and hit that like button. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The lake looked like hammered steel under the bruised sky, whitecaps churning against the shore with the kind of violence that made seasoned sailors nervous. Ethan Cole sat in his truck at the end of the gravel drive, windshield wipers struggling against sheets of rain, and studied the house through the downpour. It shouldn't still be standing. According to the structural assessment he'd been sent, commissioned by Westfield Development Group 3 weeks ago, the building was a liability waiting to collapse. Foundation compromised, load-bearing walls weakened by water damage, roof integrity at 30%. The report recommended immediate condemnation, which would clear the way for the buyout Westfield had been pushing. Simple, clean, profitable. Except the house didn't look compromised. Ethan had been doing this work for 12 years, long enough to spot a failing structure from the road. This one sat solid on its foundation, Victorian bones showing through peeling paint, but standing square against the wind. The roofline sagged slightly on the west corner, common for buildings this age, but nothing that screamed imminent collapse. He'd seen plenty of properties bought out from under desperate owners with inflated damage reports. Usually he was brought in after the deal closed, to make the demolition look justified. This time, someone wanted him to sign off before the ink dried. He checked his phone. One new message from his sister Angela. "Jamie's asking when you'll be home. I told her tomorrow night. Don't make me a liar." Guilt settled in his chest, familiar as breathing. His daughter was 7 now, and she'd already learned to measure his absences and bedtimes and broken promises. 3 days this week, he'd been gone, chasing emergency consultations that paid double because nobody else would drive through weather like this. Single father, structural engineer, 2 roles that didn't fit together cleanly, no matter how hard he tried to make them work. "Tomorrow night," he typed back. "Promise." He'd left Boston at 4 that morning, driven 6 hours through worsening weather because Westfield's attorney had made it sound urgent. "We need independent verification before the emergency hearing," the man had said. Monday morning. "The property owner is refusing to cooperate and we need documentation that stands up in court." Translation: "We need you to make our fraudulent report look legitimate." Ethan had taken the job anyway. He always did. Because rent didn't care about ethics, and Jamie's school tuition didn't wait for his conscience to catch up. The wind rocked his truck hard enough to shift it on its suspension. Through the rain, he could see lights on inside the house, warm yellow against the storm's gray fury. Someone was home, which complicated things. The attorney had implied the property was already vacant, owner relocated, just paperwork standing between Westfield and a very profitable lakefront development. More lies. Ethan grabbed his weatherproof case from the passenger seat. Laser measure, moisture meter, structural probe, camera, tablet loaded with analysis software, and stepped out into the storm. The rain hit like cold fists, soaking through his jacket before he'd crossed half the distance to the porch. His boots sank into mud that used to be a lawn, water pooling in ruts left by recent vehicle traffic. Lots of it. Legal team, probably. Appraisers. Inspectors hired to find problems whether they existed or not. The porch steps were solid under his weight. Good craftsmanship, mortise and tenon joints still tight after what looked like 100 years. He knocked, not expecting an answer, already planning how to document the exterior and come back tomorrow with... The door opened. The woman who stood there was younger than he'd expected, maybe 28 or 30, with dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail and eyes that had the kind of exhaustion that came from weeks without proper sleep. She wore an oversized sweater with paint stains on the sleeves and held a flashlight even though the lights were still on inside. Preparing for the power to fail. Smart. "If you're with Westfield," she said, voice flat, "I've already told your lawyers everything I'm going to say." Which is no. "I'm not with Westfield." Technically, true. "My name is Ethan Cole." I'm a structural engineer. I was hired to assess the property. Her expression shifted from exhaustion to something harder. By Westfield. By their legal team, yes. So you are with them. I'm an independent contractor. My job is to evaluate the structure and report what I find, nothing more. She laughed, sharp and bitter. Right, independent, just like the last 3 independent inspectors who found every problem except the ones that actually exist. She started to close the door. I've seen the report you're here to verify. It's fiction. My answer is still no. Ethan put his hand on the doorframe, not blocking her, but making his presence harder to dismiss. Then let me prove it's fiction. That stopped her. She studied him with the kind of careful attention people developed when they'd been lied to professionally and frequently. Why would you do that? Because if the structure is sound, my report will say so. And if it's not, you deserve to know the truth before you fight a legal battle you can't win. The truth. She said it like the word was foreign. The truth is that my parents built this house with their own hands. The truth is that some corporate vulture decided the land is worth more than the building, so they're inventing reasons to take it from me. The truth is that I've spent 6 months fighting lawyers who bill more in an hour than I make in a week. Her voice cracked slightly. And now you show up in the middle of a storm, sent by the same people trying to destroy everything I have left, and you want me to believe you'll tell the truth? The wind gusted hard, driving rain across the porch. Ethan's jacket was already soaked through, water running down his collar. He should walk away. Take exterior photos, write a report based on the documentation Westfield had provided, collect his fee, and get home to Jamie. Simple. Clean. Profitable. Instead, he heard himself say, I have a daughter. She's 7. If someone tried to take our home based on lies, I'd want at least one person to show up and do their job honestly. The woman's expression shifted. Not trust, she was too worn down for that, but maybe a crack in the armor. She stepped back from the door. Lena Hart, she said, and for the record, I think you're lying, but I'm out of options, so come in before we both drown. The interior was exactly what Ethan had expected from the exterior. Well-maintained, older construction with good bones and cosmetic wear that didn't affect structural integrity. Hardwood floors, slightly warped near the windows where moisture had gotten in over the years, but still solid. Crown molding original to the build, plaster walls with hairline cracks that indicated normal settling rather than foundation failure. The kind of house that would stand another 100 years with basic maintenance. Nothing like the disaster described in Westfield's report. Lena led him through a living room cluttered with file boxes and legal documents, past a kitchen where more papers covered every surface, into what might have been a dining room but now served as her command center. A laptop sat open on a table surrounded by highlighted contracts, inspection reports, photographs, engineering diagrams she'd clearly been trying to decipher on her own. I'm not an engineer, she said, following his gaze, but I can read. And I know my house isn't falling apart. Ethan set his case down and pulled out his tablet. Walk me through it. What did their report claim? She grabbed a folder thick with documents, flipped to a page marked with sticky notes and read, Foundation compromised by water intrusion and soil shifting. Recommended immediate remediation estimated at $80,000. She looked up. I've been in the basement a dozen times. It's dry. There's no water damage. Show me. They went down together, Lena leading with her flashlight even though the basement lights worked fine. Ethan had seen enough fraudulent reports to know the patterns, vague language, worst-case estimates, problems that sounded catastrophic to lay people but didn't hold up under professional scrutiny. But he'd also seen plenty of homeowners in denial about real structural issues, unable to afford repairs and unwilling to accept reality. The basement proved Lena right. Concrete floor intact and level. Foundation walls showed minor efflorescence, white mineral deposits from historical moisture, but nothing active. No cracks wider than hairline. No bowing. No signs of water intrusion. Ethan pulled out his moisture meter and started taking readings while Lena watched. You actually know what you're doing, she said, not quite a question. 12 years. He moved along the wall documenting readings. All normal. Structural engineering, specializing in residential and light commercial assessment. Before that, 4 years getting a master's degree while working construction to pay for it. Why? He glanced back. Why what? Why structural engineering? Most people don't wake up wanting to calculate load-bearing capacity for a living. Ethan smiled slightly, still working. My daughter asked the same question. I tell her it's because buildings don't lie. Politics lie. People lie. Marketing lies. But physics doesn't care what you want to be true. A structure either holds or it doesn't. And this one holds. So far. He finished the foundation survey and pulled out his laser measure. But I need to check everything before I say that officially. Load-bearing walls, roof structure, floor joists, water damage, settling patterns. If I'm going to contradict Westfield's report, I need documentation they can't dismiss. Lena was quiet for a moment. Then, you're actually going to do it. Fight them. I'm going to tell the truth. What you do with it is your choice. Why? She moved closer, and in the basement's harsh light, he could see how young she really was. Late 20s at most, carrying the weight of a battle she'd never asked for. You said yourself you were hired by their legal team. Why risk your reputation for a stranger? Because I've signed too many reports that made the lies easier. Because I've taken the money and gone home and tried not to think about the families displaced by my professional courtesy. Because my daughter deserves a father who draws a line somewhere. Because the report they sent me is garbage, he said instead, and I don't put my name on garbage. Thunder cracked overhead, close enough to rattle the windows. The lights flickered once, twice, then steadied. Lena's flashlight beam wavered. Storm's getting worse, she said. You should probably finish fast. They went back upstairs. Ethan worked methodically, documenting everything. Load-bearing walls, solid. Floor joists, some age-appropriate sagging but structurally sound. Windows, old but functional, no frame rot. He photographed, measured, recorded data, building a comprehensive picture that contradicted Westfield's assessment point by point. Lena stayed close, asking questions that showed she'd done her research. What about the roof? Their report says it's at 30% integrity. I'll need to access the attic, but from what I can see of the roof line outside, that's an exaggeration at minimum. Ethan pulled down the attic stairs, testing their stability before climbing. 30% would mean visible sagging, likely some interior water damage, possibly daylight showing through. You'd know if it was that bad. The attic confirmed his suspicion. The roof showed its age. Some shingles would need replacing soon, minor wood deterioration in a few areas where moisture had gotten past the underlayment. But the main structure was sound. Rafters intact, ridge beams solid, no catastrophic failure points. Repairs needed, yes. Tens of thousands in emergency remediation? Absolutely not. He was taking photographs of a particularly well-preserved roof joint, making mental notes for his report when the wind hit. It came like a physical blow, slamming into the house hard enough to make the entire structure shudder. Ethan grabbed the nearest rafter for stability, heard Lena gasp from below, felt the building sway in a way that old houses did during major storms, flexing, absorbing the impact, settling back. Then the crack. He knew the sound instantly, wood fiber failing under stress. Not the whole structure, something specific, localized, but serious. He scrambled towards the attic stairs, already calculating vectors, trying to pinpoint the source. Lena, move away from... The ceiling exploded inward. A section of roof beam, waterlogged and weakened by years of minor moisture intrusion in exactly the wrong spot, gave way under the combined assault of wind pressure and accumulated rain weight. 200 pounds of timber and debris crashed through the attic floor into the room below, right where Lena had been standing. Right where she would have died if Ethan hadn't shoved her aside in the half-second before impact. They hit the floor hard, Ethan's shoulder taking most of the collision, Lena gasping beneath him. Rain poured through the wound in the roof, a waterfall of cold fury that soaked them both instantly. Wind screamed through the opening, scattering papers, overturning furniture, turning the command center into chaos. Ethan rolled off her, assessing damage with the automatic precision of someone trained to see structural failure. The beam had punched through the ceiling joists, taking out a section roughly 4 feet across. Above them, through the ragged hole, he could see the storm, roiling clouds lit by lightning, rain falling in sheets that poured into the house like a broken dam. "Are you hurt?" He had to shout over the wind. Lena pushed herself up, eyes wide with shock, soaked hair plastered to her face. I'm okay. The house, compromised but not collapsing. We need to contain this before the water damage spreads. He was already moving, grabbing his case, mind shifting into crisis mode. Do you have tarps, plywood, anything waterproof? She stared at the destruction, at the gaping hole where her ceiling had been, and something in her expression cracked. This is it. This is what they needed. Proof that the house is unsafe. They win. No. Ethan caught her arm, forcing her to look at him instead of the damage. They win if we let it fail. Do you have materials or not? The question snapped her back. Garage, my father kept supplies, tarps, lumber, tools. Show me. They ran through the house, water already pooling on hardwood floors, dripping from the intact ceiling around the damaged section. The garage was detached, accessible through a covered walkway that provided minimal shelter from the storm. Inside, organized chaos, shelves of tools, stacks of lumber, painting supplies, everything a skilled craftsman would keep for maintaining a house he'd built himself. Lena pulled down a heavy-duty tarp, while Ethan grabbed a bundle of 2x4s and a cordless drill he prayed still had battery life. Your father built this house himself? With my mother. Took them 3 years. She yanked another tarp free, movements fierce. He was a carpenter. She was an architect. They designed every room together, argued about every detail, poured everything they had into making it perfect. Her voice hardened. And now some developer wants to tear it down for condos. They hauled everything back through the storm. The rain had intensified, coming down so hard it was difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. By the time they reached the house, they were both soaked to the bone, shivering, fighting wind that wanted to rip the tarp from their hands. Inside, the damage had spread. Water poured through the roof breach, flooding the room, soaking into walls, running down into the floor below. Ethan assessed quickly. They needed to cover the hole from above, working in the attic where they could secure the tarp to intact structure. Dangerous in this storm, but waiting meant catastrophic water damage to everything below. I need to get into the attic, he said. You stay down here and… No. Lena's voice was absolute. It's my house. I'm helping. He wanted to argue, should argue. This was dangerous work, and she wasn't trained for it. But the look on her face reminded him of every time someone had tried to tell him he couldn't do something because he was too young, too inexperienced, had too many responsibilities to take risks. Then stay behind me and do exactly what I say. They climbed into the attic together, the storm raging through the breach like a living thing. Wind tore at them, rain blinding, cold seeping into bones. Ethan moved carefully, testing each step, hyper-aware of the woman behind him and the damaged structure around them. One wrong move, one additional failure point, and they could both go through the weakened floor. He positioned himself at the edge of the breach, bracing against a solid rafter. Hand me the tarp. Lena passed it forward, movement steady despite the chaos. Together, they wrestled the heavy material across the opening, fighting wind that wanted to rip it away, securing it with the 2x4s screwed directly into intact rafters. It wasn't pretty, and it wouldn't last more than a few days, but it stopped the immediate flood. The second tarp went over the first, doubling protection. Then a third layer for good measure. By the time they finished, Ethan's hands were numb with cold, his shoulder screaming from the earlier impact, but the breach was contained. They climbed down into a house that looked like a disaster zone. Water covered the floor in the damaged room, dripping from furniture, soaking into files and papers Lena had spent months organizing. The legal documents she'd been studying were pulp. The laptop was open, screen dark, likely destroyed. Lena stood in the doorway, surveying the destruction, and for the first time since Ethan had met her, she looked defeated. I had everything documented, she said quietly. Every communication with Westfield, every legal filing, every piece of evidence that they were lying about the damage. She gestured at the ruined papers. It's all gone. Do you have backups? She shook her head. I scanned some of it, but not everything. I was going to finish this weekend. A bitter laugh. Guess that's not happening. Ethan looked at the destruction, at this woman who'd been fighting alone against forces designed to grind her down, and made a decision that would have horrified his practical side if he'd given himself time to think about it. Where's your electrical panel? Lena blinked. What? Electrical panel. The storm's getting worse, and we're going to lose power. I need to know what we're working with. Basement, but show me. They went down again, Lena's flashlight beam cutting through shadows. The panel was old but well-maintained, labeled clearly in handwriting that must have been her father's. Ethan traced the circuits, mapping the house's electrical layout in his head. "You have a sump pump?" "Yes, but it hasn't run in years. The basement doesn't flood." "It's going to tonight." He'd seen the water pooling outside, the saturated ground, the way rain was coming down. "That tarp will hold against the worst of it, but water's still getting in through the breach. It'll run down into the walls, seep into the foundation. We need to manage it before it creates the damage Westfield claimed already exists." Understanding dawned in her eyes. "You're not leaving." "Not until the storm passes." He looked at her directly. "You can't handle this alone. The roof breach needs constant monitoring. Water damage needs active management. If the power fails, we'll need to run everything manually. This house is sound, Lena, but it's under attack right now. It needs defending. You have a daughter. She's expecting you home tomorrow." "Tomorrow night. I promise tomorrow night." He checked his watch. "It's barely 6 p.m. A storm should break by morning. I'll have time." "Why are you doing this?" "Because I'm tired of being part of the problem. Because I've taken the easy money too many times. Because for once, I want to be the person my daughter thinks I am. Because I'm here," he said simply. "And because it's the right thing to do." Lena held his gaze for a long moment, searching for the lie, the angle, the inevitable betrayal. Whatever she saw made her nod slowly. "Okay," she said. "Then we work together. But first we're getting dry clothes before we both die of hypothermia." She disappeared upstairs and returned with an armload of clothes, oversized sweatshirt, sweatpants, thick socks. They were my father's, should fit close enough. Ethan changed in the bathroom, grateful for dry fabric against frozen skin. When he emerged, Lena had changed too, and had started making coffee on a gas stove that didn't require electricity. Smart. Prepared. He was beginning to understand how she'd survived 6 months of legal warfare. They drank coffee in the kitchen while the storm raged outside, and Lena started talking. About her parents, who'd poured everything into this house and died in a car accident 2 years ago, leaving her with a home full of memories and mortgage debt she'd been struggling to manage. About Westfield Development, which had made an offer within weeks of the funeral. Insulting, but she'd refused anyway because selling felt like erasing her parents. About how the offers had gotten more aggressive, the pressure more intense, until finally the legal threats started coming. "They want the land," she said, staring into her coffee. "The house is just in the way. They'll tear it down the day after they take possession and build luxury condos that'll sell for millions. My parents' entire legacy, gone, so some corporation can make profit." "The emergency hearing," Ethan said. When is it?" "Monday morning. Westfield's attorney filed for emergency condemnation based on that structural report. If the judge agrees the house is unsafe, I'll have 72 hours to vacate before they demolish it." She set down her cup. "I've been trying to fight it with my own documentation, but I don't have engineering credentials. No one takes me seriously." "They will now." Ethan pulled out his tablet, miraculously still functional despite the chaos. "I'm going to write a report that contradicts Westfield's assessment point by point. Certified, detailed, backed by data they can't dismiss. By Monday morning, you'll have professional documentation that your house is structurally sound." Hope flickered in her eyes, fragile and dangerous. "You'd really do that?" "I'm already doing it." He opened his analysis software, started entering data. "But we have work to do first. That roof breach is contained, but it's not fixed. We need to monitor it constantly, make sure the tarps hold, and we need to manage water intrusion before it creates actual damage." They worked through the night like soldiers in a foxhole, united against a common enemy. Every hour, Ethan climbed into the attic to check the tarps, tightening screws, adding reinforcement where wind tried to tear through their hasty repairs. Lena mapped water intrusion points, setting up a network of buckets and towels to catch drips, directing flow away from electrical outlets and load-bearing walls. Around midnight, the power failed. The house plunged into darkness, only their flashlights cutting through the black. In the basement, the sump pump died with a mechanical groan, and water immediately began pooling in the low corner where drainage collected. "How long until it floods?" Lena asked, voice tight. Ethan calculated quickly. 2 hours, maybe 3. We need to drain it manually or get the pump running. There's a generator in the garage, but I've never used it. They fought their way back outside, wind nearly knocking them over, rain coming down in sheets that made breathing difficult. The generator was old but well maintained, her father's work again. Ethan got it running on the second pull, and they hauled it close enough to run extension cords into the basement. The sump pump roared to life, immediately beginning to push water out and away from the foundation. Relief was short-lived. The generator was loud enough to make conversation difficult, and it would burn through fuel in hours. They had maybe one canister of gas left in the garage, enough to run until dawn if they were lucky. They set up a rotation. Ethan took first watch, monitoring both the attic and the basement while Lena tried to salvage what she could from the damaged room upstairs. He found her an hour later, sitting amid ruined papers, sorting through wet documents with methodical desperation. "Anything recoverable?" he asked. She held up a water-stained contract. "Maybe 20%. Everything else is pulp." She looked up at him, exhausted. "They couldn't have planned this better if they'd tried. I lost my entire case file." "You haven't lost anything." Ethan sat down across from her, ignoring the water soaking into his borrowed sweatpants. "Your case was never about paperwork. It was about the physical structure, and I can prove the structure is sound." "Can you prove Westfield manipulated their report? Can you prove they've been harassing me for 6 months? Can you prove this was all a coordinated campaign to steal my home?" Her voice cracked. "Because without documentation, it's my word against a corporation with unlimited legal resources." She wasn't wrong. Proving the house was structurally sound would stop the emergency condemnation, but it wouldn't address the larger pattern of harassment. Westfield could just switch tactics, find another angle, keep the pressure on until Lena broke or ran out of money to fight. Unless. "The report they sent me," Ethan said slowly. "The one claiming catastrophic damage. Who signed it?" Lena pulled out her phone, swiped through photos of documents. "Richard Vance. Some engineering firm out of New York that specializes in acquisition assessments." Ethan knew the name, knew the firm. Specialists in making problems disappear, or appear, depending on who was paying. He'd turned down work from them twice because their reputation for flexible ethics made even his compromised conscience uncomfortable. "If I can prove Vance's report was fraudulent," he said, "not just wrong, but deliberately falsified, that's a different case. That's professional misconduct, possibly fraud." "How?" "By documenting everything exactly as it is, then showing point by point how Vance's assessment could only have been reached through deliberate misrepresentation." He started pulling up his earlier data, comparing it to the report Westfield had sent. "Look at this. Vance claimed foundation cracks up to 2 inches wide. I measured every crack in your foundation. None exceed a 1/4 inch. That's not a mistake. That's fabrication." Lena leaned closer, studying the numbers. "He claimed water damage throughout the basement. You found none. Minor historical efflorescence, common in structures this age. Nothing active." Ethan kept scrolling. He estimated 80,000 in foundation repairs. Even if there were problems, which there aren't, that number is inflated by at least 50%. So he lied. Systematically, professionally. Ethan looked up from the tablet. "Which means if we can prove it, Westfield's entire legal strategy collapses. The emergency hearing gets dismissed, their acquisition timeline gets destroyed, and you get leverage." For the first time since the roof breach, Lena smiled. Leverage for what? For making them go away. For getting compensation for the harassment. For making sure they think twice before trying this with someone else. He stood, offering his hand to pull her up. "But first, we have to survive the storm and document everything perfectly. No mistakes. No gaps they can exploit." She took his hand, let him pull her to her feet. "You really think we can win?" "I think you've already been winning. You've held them off for 6 months with nothing but determination and your parents' legacy. Now you've got documentation and someone who knows how to make it matter." He squeezed her hand once before releasing it. "Yeah, I think we can win." They worked until dawn, trading off watches, managing crises as they emerged. The generator ran out of fuel at 4 a.m., and they spent a tense hour bailing water manually before the sump pump could restart, when Ethan managed to siphon gas from his truck. The tarps held, barely, requiring constant reinforcement against wind that seemed determined to find every weakness. Somewhere around 5 a.m., delirious with exhaustion, they sat together in the kitchen drinking the last of the coffee. Lena had stopped trying to salvage documents. accepting the loss and focusing instead on what could be preserved. Ethan had documented every inch of the house, building a comprehensive report that would take Vance's fraudulent assessment apart. "Tell me about your daughter," Lena said quietly. Ethan pulled out his phone, showed her his lock screen, Jamie grinning at the camera, missing her 2 front teeth, wearing the Red Sox jersey he'd bought her last birthday. "Jamie, 7 years old. Smarter than me, probably. Definitely funnier. She looks like you." "Poor kid." He smiled despite his exhaustion. "Her mother died when she was 2. Aneurysm. No warning. One day we were a family, the next day I was a single parent with no idea what I was doing. I'm sorry." "Me too." He put the phone away. "I thought about quitting engineering, finding something with better hours, more stability. But the degree costs too much to waste, and the work pays well enough to give Jamie the life she deserves. So I take the jobs that come, travel when necessary, and try to be home enough that she remembers what I look like. She's lucky to have you." "I'm not sure about that. Most days I feel like I'm failing at everything simultaneously." He looked at Lena. "You don't have kids?" "No. Haven't found someone worth building that life with." She gestured at the house around them. "And lately I've been too busy fighting to save the life I already have." "What happens after? If we win, if Westfield backs off, what then?" She was quiet for a long moment, staring at the damaged ceiling above them. "I don't know. Keep the house, obviously. But beyond that?" She shook her head. "I've spent so long fighting, I'm not sure I remember how to do anything else." The sky outside was beginning to lighten, storm clouds breaking apart to reveal gray dawn. The wind had diminished to irregular gusts, rain reduced to a steady drizzle. The worst had passed. Ethan stood, every muscle screaming protest. "We should check the damage in daylight, see what we're really dealing with." They walked through the house together, documenting destruction and survival in equal measure. The roof breach was ugly but contained, tarps holding strong despite the beating they'd taken. Water damage throughout the upper floor would require cleanup but wasn't structural. The basement had stayed dry thanks to their constant management. Floors would need refinishing where water had pooled. Walls would need repainting. Some ceiling repair, new insulation where rain had soaked through. Expensive and convenient, but nothing catastrophic, nothing that justified condemnation. "I can have the full report ready by tomorrow afternoon," Ethan said, making notes on his tablet. "Certified structural assessment, detailed photographic documentation, point-by-point rebuttal of Vance's claims. Everything you need for Monday's hearing." Lena stood in the damaged room, surrounded by evidence of the night they'd survived together, and something in her posture had changed. The defeat was gone, replaced by something harder, determined. "Thank you," she said, "for staying, for fighting, for not being one more person who took the easy money and walked away. I should be thanking you." At her confused look, he continued, "I've spent 5 years taking jobs I hated, writing reports that made other people's lives easier, telling myself it was necessary because I had responsibilities. You reminded me that some things matter more than necessity." The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither seemed willing to name. Then Ethan's phone buzzed, Angela, asking if he was okay, reminding him that Jamie was expecting him home tonight. "I need to go," he said. "Drive back to Boston, spend tomorrow with my daughter, send you the report by Sunday night. The storm, the roads won't be safe yet." "They're safe enough, and I promised." He started gathering his equipment, movements automatic. "I'll email you the preliminary data within the hour. Full report follows tomorrow. If you have questions before Monday, call me. Day or night, doesn't matter." Lena walked him to the door, neither speaking, both aware that something significant had shifted during the long night, but unsure how to acknowledge it. At the threshold, Ethan paused. "You're going to win this," he said. "Not because of my report, but because you were already winning before I showed up. People like you don't quit. Westfield's going to learn that the hard way." She smiled, tired but genuine. "People like me? You mean stubborn?" "I mean strong." He held her gaze. "Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." Then he was gone, walking back to his truck through morning rain, leaving Lena standing in the doorway of the house they'd defended together. She watched until his taillights disappeared down the gravel drive, then closed the door and looked at the destruction around her. The house was damaged but standing. Her case file was destroyed but replaceable. Westfield was still coming for her home, but now she had ammunition to fight back. And somewhere on the road to Boston, a structural engineer who'd chosen truth over convenience was building her the weapon she needed. The storm had passed. The real battle was just beginning. Ethan made it as far as the highway entrance before he had to pull over. His hands were shaking on the wheel, not from cold, though his borrowed clothes were still damp beneath his jacket, but from the adrenaline crash hitting him all at once. He'd been running on crisis mode for 12 hours straight, and now that the immediate danger had passed, his body was demanding payment for the debt. He sat in the truck with the engine running, watching early morning traffic build on the interstate, and tried to process what he'd just done. He'd promised a complete structural report by tomorrow night. That meant today, Sunday, would be spent writing, documenting, building an airtight case, while simultaneously being present for Jamie, his daughter who'd already spent too many weekends watching him work instead of playing with her, who'd learned to measure his attention in the gaps between phone calls and email responses. His phone buzzed. Angela again. "Road's still bad. Take your time. Jamie's fine." Then a moment later, "She made you a drawing. Says it's important. Won't show me. Only you." Guilt and warmth tangled in his chest. 7 years old, and she already understood that some things were meant to be private gifts between father and daughter. He typed back, "Be home by noon. Tell her I can't wait to see it." The drive back to Boston took 8 hours instead of 6, roads slick with standing water and debris from the storm. Ethan used the time to organize his thoughts, building the structure of his report in his head, the way he'd learned to do during long commutes when Jamie was a baby, and every moment counted. Foundation analysis first, then load-bearing walls, roof structure, water damage assessment, comparative analysis with Vance's fraudulent claims. Each section would need photographic evidence, measurements, calculations showing how Vance's numbers were impossible given the actual conditions. It would be damning, professionally explosive, the kind of report that could end Vance's career and put Westfield's legal team in a very uncomfortable position, which meant they'd fight back hard. He thought about Lena standing in her destroyed command center, surrounded by ruined paperwork, still refusing to quit. 6 months she'd been fighting alone, and now he was about to make himself a target alongside her. His phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Mr. Cole?" The voice was smooth, professional, with an edge that suggested expensive legal training. "This is Calvin Rourke, Senior Counsel for Westfield Development Group. I understand you visited the Hart property yesterday." Ethan's grip tightened on the wheel. "How did you get this number?" "We hired you, Mr. Cole. Of course we have your contact information." A pause. "I'm calling to check on the status of your assessment. Given the severe weather, we want to ensure there were no complications that might delay your report." Translation. "We want to know if you found anything that contradicts our narrative." "The assessment is ongoing," Ethan said carefully. "I'll have a complete report ready for delivery as contracted." "Excellent. We're hoping to present your findings at Monday's emergency hearing. Time is rather critical." Another pause, waited. "I trust your assessment will align with Mr. Vance's previous evaluation." There it was. The pressure, applied with surgical precision. Not quite a threat, but close enough to feel dangerous. "My assessment will reflect the actual structural condition of the property," Ethan said. "Nothing more, nothing less." The silence on the other end stretched long enough to become uncomfortable. Then, "Of course, we value professional integrity, Mr. Cole. Though I should mention, and I'm sure this is unnecessary, but for liability purposes, that any report contradicting established engineering findings would need to withstand rather intensive scrutiny. Westfield has significant resources to dedicate to verifying accuracy. We wouldn't want any misunderstandings about methodology or data interpretation." The threat wasn't even subtle anymore. "Challenge our report, and we'll bury you in legal scrutiny until your reputation is destroyed." "I appreciate your concern," Ethan said, voice flat. "My methodology is sound, my data is documented, and my professional liability insurance is current. I'm confident any scrutiny will validate my findings." "I certainly hope so." Rourke's tone shifted, became almost friendly. "You have a daughter, don't you, Mr. Cole? 7 years old? Angela mentioned her when we spoke about scheduling." Ice flooded Ethan's veins. Leave my family out of this. I'm simply making conversation. Single parenting is challenging, especially with a career as demanding as yours. It would be unfortunate if professional complications made that situation more difficult. A beat. We'll look forward to receiving your report. Have a safe drive back to Boston. The line went dead. Ethan pulled off at the next rest stop, hands shaking again, but this time from pure rage. They just threatened his daughter. Obliquely, with plausible deniability, but the message was clear. Cooperate or face consequences that extended beyond professional reputation. He sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes, breathing through the fury, forcing himself to think strategically instead of emotionally. Rourke was a professional intimidator. That phone call was designed to provoke exactly this reaction: fear, anger, hasty decisions made from a position of weakness. But Ethan had spent 5 years watching Jamie navigate a world that told her she couldn't do things because her mother was dead and her father was too busy. She'd learned to stand her ground anyway, to fight for what mattered, to refuse to accept other people's limitations as her own truth. If he backed down now, what lesson would that teach her? He pulled out his phone and called Lena. She answered on the second ring, sounding exhausted but alert. Ethan, did you make it back okay? I'm fine. Listen, Westfield's attorney just called me. Calvin Rourke. He's fishing for information and making thinly veiled threats about what happens if my report contradicts theirs. A sharp intake of breath. What did you tell him? That my report will reflect reality, but you need to be prepared. They're going to fight this harder than you expected. Rourke basically admitted they'll use every resource to discredit any evidence that contradicts their narrative. So we're going to war. We're already at war. This is just them acknowledging it. He paused. He also implied threats toward my daughter. Nothing overt, but enough to make his point. Jesus, Ethan, you should walk away. I can't ask you to risk your family for... You didn't ask. I chose. His voice was firm. And I'm not walking away because some corporate lawyer thinks he can intimidate me. But you need to know what we're up against. Westfield isn't going to roll over because of one structural report. They're going to challenge everything. My credentials, my methodology, my data. They'll hire their own experts to contradict mine. This could get ugly. Lena was quiet for a moment. Then, what do you need from me? Documentation. Everything you have on Westfield's campaign against you. Communications, offers, legal threats. Even with your case file damaged, you must have something. Emails, letters, recorded calls. I need to show a pattern of harassment that contextualized Vance's fraudulent report. I have emails going back 6 months, and my lawyer has copies of everything they filed. Good. Send it all to me. I'll build a timeline showing how Westfield's pressure escalated, how the structural report was commissioned at exactly the moment when legal intimidation wasn't working, how the findings conveniently justified their acquisition strategy. You're not just writing a structural assessment anymore. No. Ethan pulled back onto the highway, jaw set. I'm building a case for fraud, and I'm going to make it impossible for them to ignore. He made it home by noon, as promised. Angela met him at the door, took one look at his face, and pulled him into a hug without saying anything. His sister had always been able to read him too clearly. You look like hell, she said finally, and you smell like wet basement. Long night. He stepped back, managed a tired smile. Where's Jamie? Living room. She's been asking about you every 30 minutes since she woke up. Angela studied him with the expression that meant she was deciding whether to push for details. This job, it's more complicated than usual, isn't it? Yeah. No point lying to her. I might have gotten involved in something bigger than a standard assessment. Does it involve the reason you look like you fought a building and lost? The building won round 1. I'm preparing for the rematch. Angela sighed. Just tell me you're not doing anything stupid. Define stupid. Ethan. I'm doing the right thing, which sometimes looks like stupid from certain angles. He squeezed her shoulder. I'll explain later. Right now, I have a drawing to see. Jamie was curled up on the couch with her sketch pad, so absorbed in whatever she was creating that she didn't hear him come in. Ethan stood in the doorway for a moment, just watching her, dark hair falling forward, tongue stuck out slightly in concentration, completely present in the world she was building on paper. Then she looked up, saw him, and launched herself across the room. Daddy! He caught her, lifted her up despite his protesting muscles, breathed in the smell of her shampoo, and felt something in his chest settle. This was what mattered. Not Westfield's threats or Rourke's intimidation or even the promise he'd made to Lena. This small person who trusted him completely, who believed he could fix anything, who deserved a father who showed up. "I missed you, Bug. I missed you more." She pulled back to look at his face. "You look tired." "I am tired. Long drive, bad weather." He set her down carefully. "Aunt Angela said you made me something?" Jamie's expression shifted to serious, the way it did when something was important. She retrieved her sketchpad, opened it to a page she'd marked with a sticky note, and held it up. It was a drawing of a house, simple but detailed, with careful windows and a pointed roof and flowers in the front yard. Two figures stood in the doorway, one tall and one small, holding hands. At the bottom, in her careful second-grade handwriting, "Our house, where we live together. I love you, Daddy." Ethan felt his throat close. "Jamie, this is beautiful." "It's so you remember," she said quietly, "when you're away for work, that you always come back to our house." He knelt down to her level, holding the drawing like the precious thing it was. "I always come back. Always. No matter what. Promise?" "Promise." He pulled her into another hug, holding her tight while his mind raced with uncomfortable questions. How much did she worry about this? How many nights did she lie awake wondering if he'd come home? What damage was he doing by constantly leaving, even when he always returned? They spent the afternoon together, lunch at her favorite diner, a walk through the park despite the wet ground, ice cream even though it was too cold for it. Normal things, father-daughter time that felt both precious and insufficient. Jamie chattered about school, about her friends, about a science project on weather systems that suddenly felt cosmically appropriate. "Did you see the big storm?" she asked, swinging his hand as they walked. "Aunt Angela said it was really bad." "I was in it, actually. Had to help someone protect their house." "Did you save them?" "We saved each other." He squeezed her hand. "Teamwork. Like superheroes." He smiled. "Kind of. Except instead of superpowers, we had tarps and a generator and a lot of determination." "That's still heroic," Jamie said matter-of-factly. "Heroes don't need powers. They just need to help people." Out of the mouths of 7-year-olds. They got home as the sun was setting. Angela had dinner ready, her way of taking care of him without making a big deal about it. Over pasta, Jamie regaled her aunt with an elaborate retelling of their afternoon that somehow involved more ice cream flavors than actually existed. Ethan listened, participated, kept his phone face down on the table even though he could feel it buzzing with incoming emails. After Jamie went to bed, he finally checked his messages. Lena had sent everything she promised. 6 months of communications with Westfield, a timeline of escalating pressure, copies of legal filings, documentation of offers that started reasonable and became insulting. The pattern was clear: systematic harassment designed to break her will to resist. Angela found him at the kitchen table 2 hours later, laptop open, surrounded by notes and coffee cups. "You're working on it tonight." "I promised a report by tomorrow night." "That means working tonight." He rubbed his eyes. "And tomorrow. Probably straight through." "This woman you helped, she must be important." "She's a stranger who's being robbed by people with enough power to make it legal." He looked up at his sister. "And I have the ability to stop it." "At what cost?" That was the question, wasn't it? Rourke's call had made the stakes clear. Fighting Westfield meant professional scrutiny, potential litigation, resources directed toward destroying his credibility. It meant time away from Jamie, stress brought into their home, risks that extended beyond just his own career. "I don't know yet," he admitted, "but I know the cost of not doing it, and I can't live with that." Angela sat down across from him. "Mom would have liked her, the woman you're fighting for." "You don't even know her." I know she inspired my practical, cautious brother to spend a night in a storm defending a stranger's house instead of coming home to his daughter." She smiled slightly. "That takes someone special." "It's not like that." "Isn't it?" Ethan thought about Lena standing in the wreckage of her command center, refusing to quit. About working beside her through the long night, matching her determination with his own. About the moment at the door when leaving felt harder than it should have. It's complicated, he said finally. The good things usually are. Angela stood, squeezed his shoulder. Just don't forget you have people here who need you, too. Whatever you're fighting for out there, we're fighting for in here. She went to bed, leaving him alone with his work. Ethan pulled up the structural data, began writing the report that would either vindicate Lena or destroy his professional credibility. Possibly both. He worked through this night, building his case section by section. The foundation analysis came together quickly. Vance's claims were so obviously fraudulent that documenting the truth felt almost insulting to the profession. 2-inch cracks that didn't exist, water damage that wasn't there. Repair estimates inflated beyond any reasonable justification. But proving Vance had lied wasn't enough. Ethan needed to show why he'd lied, and that meant contextualizing the structural report within Westfield's broader campaign. He built a timeline, cross-referencing Lena's emails with the dates of escalating legal pressure. The pattern was damning. Every time Lena resisted an offer, Westfield's response became more aggressive. And when legal intimidation failed to break her, they commissioned an engineering assessment designed to manufacture justification for condemnation. Around 3 a.m., he found something that made him sit back and stare at the screen. Vance's report was dated 2 weeks ago. But according to Lena's emails, Westfield's attorney had referenced structural concerns requiring professional assessment in a letter dated 3 weeks ago, before Vance had supposedly inspected the property. They'd planned the fraudulent report before it was written. Ethan documented the discrepancy, added it to his growing case file, and kept writing. By dawn, he had a 40-page report that systematically dismantled Westfield's justification for emergency condemnation. It was thorough, professional, and absolutely devastating. He sent it to Lena at 6 a.m. with a message. First draft attached. Review, and let me know if anything needs clarification. This goes to your lawyer by tonight. Her response came within minutes. I'm reading it now. Ethan, this is incredible. Then, a few minutes later, the timeline section. You proved they planned Vance's report before he inspected the house. That's fraud. Yes. They're going to come after you for this. Let them. I documented everything. They can scrutinize all they want. The data doesn't lie. A long pause. Then, thank you. I know what this costs you. He thought about Jamie's drawing, about Angela's warning, about the risks he was taking with both their futures. Worth it, he typed. Then, before he could overthink it, how are you holding up? Exhausted, scared, hopeful. Another pause. I spent yesterday cleaning up water damage and trying not to think about tomorrow. Your report makes it feel real, like maybe we actually have a chance. We have more than a chance. We have the truth. I'm starting to believe that matters. It has to. Jamie woke up an hour later, found him still at the kitchen table, and climbed into his lap without saying anything. Ethan wrapped his arms around her, breathing in her presence, grounding himself in what was real and permanent and good. You worked all night, she said finally. I had to finish something important. For the person whose house you saved? Yeah. Are bad people trying to take it from her? Smart kid. Yeah, Bug. Bad people with lots of money and lawyers. Jamie was quiet, processing. Then, are you going to stop them? I'm going to try. You'll win. She said it with complete certainty, the kind of faith only children possessed. Because you're my dad, and you're the smartest person I know. I'm not sure about that. I am. She twisted to look at him seriously. You always tell me to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. So you have to do that too. Ethan felt something crack open in his chest. Here he'd been agonizing over whether he was setting the right example, whether his choices were teaching her the right lessons, and she'd already internalized the most important one. Integrity wasn't optional. You're right, he said, and I will. Good. She climbed down, completely satisfied with his answer. Now can we make pancakes? I'm starving. They made pancakes together, Jamie helping in ways that created more mess than efficiency, but filled the kitchen with her laughter. Angela joined them, raised an eyebrow at Ethan's haggard appearance, but didn't comment. They ate together, the three of them, and for a few hours, Ethan let himself exist in this simple moment instead of the battle waiting beyond it. His phone rang at noon, Lena, voice tight with stress. Calvin Rourke just called me. He knows about your report. Ethan felt ice form in his stomach. How? I haven't sent the final version yet. I don't know, but he referenced specific findings. The foundation analysis, the timeline showing they commissioned Vance's report before the inspection. She sounded shaken. He said if we present this at tomorrow's hearing, Westfield will file an immediate motion to dismiss based on improper methodology and professional bias. That's a bluff. They have no grounds for... He also said they have evidence you spent the night at my house, that our relationship compromises your professional objectivity. A bitter laugh. Apparently defending someone's home during a storm creates a conflict of interest. Ethan's mind raced. They were adapting faster than he'd anticipated, already building a counter-narrative that painted him as emotionally involved rather than professionally honest. It was smart, vicious, and potentially effective. Did they say what evidence? No, just implied they have documentation proving we have a personal relationship that undermines your credibility, which meant they'd been watching her, possibly had someone monitoring the property, had seen his truck there overnight and were now weaponizing his decision to stay and help. Lena, listen to me carefully. They're trying to scare you into not using the report. That's all this is. Psychological warfare. It's working. Her voice cracked slightly. Maybe there's another way. A settlement or... No. He said it firmly enough that Jamie looked up from her coloring book. He lowered his voice. That's exactly what they want. They know my report destroys their case, so they're trying to make you too afraid to use it. Don't let them win that way. But if they challenge your credibility, then I'll defend it, in court, if necessary. My methodology is sound, my data is documented, and the fact that I stayed to help during an emergency doesn't change the structural realities of your house. He paused. Trust me, please. The silence stretched long enough that he thought she might refuse. Then, okay, we fight. We fight, he confirmed. I'll send the final report to your lawyer tonight. Tomorrow morning, we show up and we present the truth. And we let Westfield explain to a judge why their assessment was wrong and mine is right. What if the judge believes them? Then we appeal, and we keep fighting until someone listens. He glanced at Jamie, who was pretending not to listen while obviously absorbing every word. Some battles are worth fighting even when the outcome isn't certain. After he hung up, Jamie looked at him seriously. Is the lady going to be okay? I hope so. She's lucky you're helping her. I'm lucky she let me. He spent the rest of Sunday refining the report, adding additional documentation, strengthening every section until it was bulletproof. Angela kept Jamie occupied, taking her to a movie and then to visit friends, giving Ethan uninterrupted time to work. By evening, he had a final version that he was willing to stake his professional reputation on. He sent it to Lena's lawyer with a cover email explaining the methodology, the data sources, the reasoning behind every conclusion. Then he called Lena one more time. It's done. Your lawyer has everything. I just saw it. She sounded steadier now, the fear from earlier replaced by determination. He says it's the strongest defense he's seen in a case like this. Good, because tomorrow's going to be intense. Will you be there? At the hearing? Ethan hadn't planned to be. The hearing was at 9 a.m., which meant leaving Boston by 6 to make the 3-hour drive. It meant missing Monday morning with Jamie, breaking the routine they'd established, adding more time away to a ledger already too unbalanced. But it also meant leaving Lena to face Westfield alone. Yes, he heard himself say. I'll be there. Thank you. Her voice was soft. For everything. For staying during the storm, for the report, for not walking away when they threatened you. I know what it costs. Lena, I mean it. You could have taken their money, written what they wanted, gone home to your daughter without risking anything. Instead, you chose to fight for a stranger's house because it was the right thing to do. A pause. That matters. After they hung up, Ethan sat in the quiet kitchen and thought about choices and consequences. About the kind of man he wanted to be versus the kind of man circumstances sometimes forced him to become. About Jamie's drawing of their house and Lena's house that she refused to surrender, and what it meant to fight for the places that held our lives together. Angela found him there an hour later, staring at nothing. You're going tomorrow, she said. Not a question. I have to. I know. She sat down across from him. Jamie will understand. She already does, actually. I told her you were helping someone keep their home, and she said that was heroic work. I'm not a hero. No, you're better. You're someone who shows up and does the work even when it's hard and the outcome isn't certain. She reached across the table, squeezed his hand. That's what matters. Not winning or losing, but being willing to stand up. He looked at his sister, grateful for her understanding even as guilt gnawed at him. I'm leaving you with Jamie again. For one day, to do something important. She smiled. We'll survive. Go fight your battle. We'll be here when you get back. Ethan went to check on Jamie before bed, found her already asleep with the drawing of their house tucked under her pillow. He stood in the doorway, watching her breathe, steady and peaceful, and made a silent promise that whatever happened tomorrow, he would come home. Would always come home. He left Boston at 5:30 the next morning, driving through darkness toward a confrontation that would either vindicate everything he'd fought for or destroy his credibility entirely. The highway was nearly empty, giving him too much time to think, to second guess, to catalog everything that could go wrong. His phone buzzed an hour into the drive. Lena, I couldn't sleep. Been up since 4 reviewing everything. I'm terrified. Me too, he typed back. But we're ready. What if it's not enough? Then we regroup and try again. But I don't think it will come to that. Your house is sound. Vance's report is fraudulent. The facts are on our side. Facts don't always win against power. She wasn't wrong. He'd seen too many cases where truth lost to superior resources, where right meant nothing against institutional momentum. But he'd also seen determination triumph against impossible odds, seen people like Lena hold the line until the opposition finally broke. No, he wrote, but sometimes truth plus determination plus refusal to quit is enough. We'll find out today. The courthouse was a squat brick building in a town still recovering from the storm, debris piled along streets, downed branches waiting for cleanup crews. Ethan arrived 30 minutes early and found Lena already there, standing outside with a man in an expensive but slightly rumpled suit who had to be her lawyer. She saw Ethan, and something in her expression shifted. Relief, gratitude, something else he couldn't quite name. She crossed the parking lot quickly, stopped just in front of him. You came. I said I would. I know, but I thought... She shook her head. Thank you. Her lawyer joined them, extending a hand. Marcus Webb, I've been representing Lena for 3 months now. Your report is excellent work, Mr. Cole. Call me Ethan, and thank you. I should warn you, Westfield brought their own structural engineer, Richard Vance himself, actually. He'll be testifying to defend his original assessment. Perfect. Good. I want to face him directly. Webb raised an eyebrow. You understand they're going to attack your methodology, challenge your credentials, imply bias. Let them try. He means it, Lena said quietly. Ethan doesn't back down. They went inside together, through security and metal detectors, into a courtroom that was too small for what was about to happen. Westfield's legal team was already there, Calvin Rourke and 2 associates, all expensive suits and confident postures. And sitting with them, looking every inch the distinguished professional, was Richard Vance. He was older than Ethan expected, maybe 60, with silver hair and the kind of presence that suggested decades of expert testimony. The type of witness judges trusted, juries believed, and opposing counsel feared. Ethan met his eyes across the courtroom. Vance held the gaze for a moment, then looked away first. The hearing began exactly at 9. The judge, an older woman with sharp eyes and no patience for theatrics, called the case and asked for opening statements. Rourke went first, laying out Westfield's position with practiced efficiency. Dangerous structure, recalcitrant owner, public safety concerns requiring immediate action. Webb countered, brief and precise. Fraudulent assessment, corporate harassment, professional misconduct designed to facilitate illegal acquisition. Then the testimony began. Rourke called Vance first, establishing his credentials. 40 years of experience, hundreds of assessments, expert witness in dozens of cases. Impressive. Intimidating. Exactly what Westfield needed. Vance described his inspection of Lena's property, outlined his findings, justified his conclusions with the kind of technical language that sounded authoritative to lay people. Foundation compromised. Water damage extensive. Structural integrity critically weakened. Emergency intervention necessary to prevent catastrophic failure. It was a masterful performance, and it was complete fiction. Webb cross-examined carefully, poking holes in the timeline, questioning specific findings, but Vance deflected smoothly. He'd done this too many times to be rattled by standard legal tactics. Then it was Ethan's turn. Webb stood, adjusting his tie in a way that suggested he was about to enjoy himself. "Your Honor, the defense calls Ethan Cole." Ethan walked to the witness stand with the same calm he brought to every structural inspection, methodical, focused, aware that emotion had no place in technical analysis. He was sworn in, stated his credentials, and settled into the chair with his tablet containing every measurement, every photograph, every piece of data that would dismantle Vance's lies. Webb started with the basics. "Mr. Cole, when were you first contacted about the Hart property?" "Last Friday. I received a call from Westfield Development's legal team requesting an independent structural assessment." "And what were you told about the property's condition?" "I was provided with Mr. Vance's report, which described severe structural deficiencies requiring immediate remediation or demolition." "Did you find those deficiencies when you inspected the property?" "No." The single word hung in the courtroom like a dropped stone. Rourke shifted in his seat. Vance's expression remained carefully neutral. Webb pulled up the first image on the courtroom display, one of Ethan's foundation photographs. "Can you walk us through what you found?" Ethan did, methodically and precisely. Foundation measurements showing cracks no wider than a quarter inch, all within normal parameters for a century-old structure. Moisture readings indicating historical efflorescence, but no active water intrusion. Load calculations proving the foundation's capacity exceeded current structural demands by a comfortable margin. "Mr. Vance's report claims foundation cracks up to 2 inches wide," Webb said. "You measured every crack in that basement. What was the widest you found?" 0.27 inches, just over a quarter inch. And Mr. Vance claimed $80,000 in necessary foundation repairs. Based on your assessment, what would you estimate actual repair costs to be? "There are no repairs necessary. The foundation is sound." Ethan pulled up another image, this one showing the basement wall in clear detail. Routine maintenance would include sealing minor cracks to prevent future moisture intrusion. Cost would be approximately $1,500. Professional work, maybe $3,000. But structural repair? Not needed. Webb moved through each section of Vance's report, and Ethan systematically destroyed every claim. The water damage that didn't exist, the compromised load-bearing walls that tested structurally sound, the roof at 30% integrity that showed normal age-appropriate wear but remained fully functional. "Mr. Cole," Webb said, "in your professional opinion, does the Hart property require emergency remediation?" "Absolutely not." "Does it pose any imminent danger to occupants or the public?" "No. With proper maintenance, which any structure requires, the building will stand for decades." So Mr. Vance's assessment was incorrect. Ethan met Vance's eyes across the courtroom. Mr. Vance's assessment was impossible. The deficiencies he described don't exist and show no evidence of ever having existed. The only way to reach his conclusions would be to fabricate data. Rourke shot to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. The witness is making accusations of professional misconduct without basis." "I'm describing technical impossibilities," Ethan said calmly, still looking at the judge. "Mr. Vance claimed to have measured 2-inch foundation cracks. I documented every crack in that basement. Unless the foundation healed itself between his inspection and mine, his measurements were fiction." The judge leaned forward, interested now. "Continue, Mr. Cole." "Mr. Vance's report is dated April 28th, but according to documentation provided by Ms. Hart, Westfield's legal team referenced structural concerns requiring professional assessment in a letter dated April 21st, 7 days before Mr. Vance supposedly inspected the property. Ethan pulled up the timeline on the display. They commissioned a fraudulent report before it was written. The courtroom erupted. Rourke was on his feet shouting objections. Vance had gone pale, and the judge was hammering her gavel for order. When silence finally returned, she fixed Ethan with a sharp look. "That's a serious allegation, Mr. Cole. You're accusing a licensed engineer of fabricating an entire structural assessment." "I'm stating facts, Your Honor. The timeline proves premeditation. The measurements prove falsification. The conclusions prove bias." He kept his voice level, professional. "I'm willing to stake my professional reputation on these findings. Every measurement I took is documented with time-stamped photographs. Every conclusion is backed by verifiable data. If Mr. Vance disputes any of my findings, I invite him to explain the discrepancies." The judge turned to Vance. "Mr. Vance, you'll have an opportunity to respond. Mr. Rourke, your witness." Rourke approached the stand like a predator who'd spotted weakness. "Mr. Cole, you mentioned spending time at the Hart property during the storm. How long were you there?" "Approximately 12 hours. And during that time, you developed a personal relationship with Miss Hart, didn't you?" Webb stood. "Relevance, Your Honor?" "I'm establishing bias," Rourke said smoothly. "Mr. Cole spent the night alone with Miss Hart. He's now testifying in her favor, contradicting a respected professional with 40 years of experience. The court deserves to know if his judgment has been compromised by personal involvement." The judge looked at Ethan. "Did you spend the night at the property, Mr. Cole?" "Yes. A section of roof failed during the storm. I stayed to help contain the damage and prevent water intrusion that would have created the structural problems Mr. Vance falsely claimed already existed." "How convenient," Rourke said. "You just happened to be there when the roof failed. You just happened to stay overnight, and now you're presenting a report that conveniently supports Ms. Hart's legal position." "I stayed because leaving would have been professionally irresponsible," Ethan said evenly. "The structure was under active assault from severe weather. Water intrusion was occurring. Management of the situation required constant monitoring and intervention. As a licensed structural engineer, I had an ethical obligation to prevent damage where possible." "An ethical obligation to spend the night with a young woman you'd just met?" "An ethical obligation to protect a structurally sound building from catastrophic weather damage." Ethan's voice hardened slightly. "Which I documented thoroughly. The roof breach occurred at approximately 7:15 p.m. I have time-stamped photographs showing the initial damage, the emergency repairs, the water management throughout the night. If you're suggesting I fabricated a roof failure to justify staying, I can provide meteorological data showing the storm's intensity and wind speeds consistent with the structural failure that occurred." Rourke switched tactics. "You're a single father, aren't you, Mr. Cole?" Ice flooded Ethan's veins. "Yes. Raising a daughter alone. That must be financially challenging." "Objection," Webb said sharply. "Mr. Cole's personal life is not relevant to his professional qualifications." "It's relevant to bias," Rourke countered. "Mr. Cole was hired by Westfield to provide an independent assessment. Instead, he's aligned himself with Miss Hart against his own client. I'm exploring whether financial pressure might have influenced his decision to support the party offering more sympathetic circumstances." The implication was clear and vicious. Ethan had been bought, either by money or emotion, or both. "My report was commissioned by Westfield," Ethan said, voice cold. "I was hired to assess structural integrity and document findings. That's exactly what I did. The fact that my findings contradict Mr. Vance's fabrications doesn't indicate bias. It indicates honesty. Or it indicates you found a vulnerable young woman fighting a corporation and decided to play hero." Rourke moved closer. "Tell me, Mr. Cole, did Miss Hart offer you compensation for your overnight assistance?" "No? Did she offer you anything in exchange for a favorable report?" "The question is offensive. My report is based on verifiable data, not negotiation." "But you did develop feelings for her, didn't you? During that long night working together, fighting the storm, protecting her home?" Rourke's tone was almost gentle now, sympathetic. "It's understandable. She's young, attractive, in distress. You're a single father, probably lonely, definitely overworked. These situations create emotional bonds. But those bonds compromise objectivity." Ethan felt rage building behind his professional composure. "My objectivity is demonstrated by my methodology, my data, and my willingness to put my professional reputation on the line. If you want to challenge my findings, challenge the measurements, challenge the calculations, challenge the photographic evidence. But don't mistake your inability to contradict facts with proof of bias. I'm simply suggesting that a man who spends the night with a woman might not be the most reliable witness regarding her interests. And I'm simply stating that a corporation that commissioned a fraudulent report to justify stealing someone's home might not be the most reliable party regarding structural integrity." The judge's gavel came down hard. "Gentlemen, that's enough. Mr. Rourke, unless you have questions about Mr. Cole's actual findings, move on. Rourke studied Ethan for a long moment, then smiled slightly. No further questions, Your Honor. Ethan stepped down, his hand shaking with suppressed fury. As he passed Lena, she reached out and squeezed his arm briefly. Gratitude, support, something that steadied him. The judge called a 15-minute recess. In the hallway, Webb pulled Ethan aside while Lena stayed visible through the courtroom doors. That was brutal, Webb said. But you held up. Rourke tried to rattle you and failed. He's building a narrative, biased engineer, emotional involvement, compromised judgment. Yes, but he can't actually challenge your data, which means the narrative is all he has. Webb checked his watch. When we go back in, I'm going to recall Vance for cross-examination. I want to confront him directly with your findings. Are you confident your measurements will hold up under scrutiny? Completely. Good. Because Westfield is going to throw everything they have at discrediting you. We need to make sure Vance's credibility collapses first. They returned to the courtroom. The judge resumed proceedings and Webb stood. Your Honor, I'd like to recall Richard Vance for additional cross-examination in light of Mr. Cole's testimony. Vance returned to the stand, still composed but with something tight around his eyes that hadn't been there before. Webb approached with Ethan's report displayed on his tablet. Mr. Vance, you testified that you found foundation cracks up to 2 inches wide. Mr. Cole documented every crack in that basement and found none wider than a 1/4 inch. Can you explain the discrepancy? Mr. Cole's inspection occurred after mine. Settling could have reduced crack width. Settling that closed cracks by 7/8 of an inch in 2 weeks? Webb's tone was skeptical. That would require massive structural movement. Did you document any evidence of such movement? The structure was unstable. Movement was expected. But you didn't document it. In fact, your report contains no photographs of these alleged 2-inch cracks. Webb pulled up the image comparison. Vance's report beside Ethan's photographs. Why not? Photographic documentation wasn't requested. Wasn't requested? You're claiming catastrophic structural failure requiring emergency demolition, and you didn't think to document it visually? Webb let that sit for a moment. Mr. Vance, when exactly did you inspect the Hart property? April 28th, as stated in my report. Can you provide any evidence of that inspection? Photographs, timestamp data, GPS records showing you were at the location? Vance hesitated. I don't typically maintain that level of documentation for standard assessments. This wasn't a standard assessment. This was a report that would determine whether a woman lost her home. Webb's voice hardened. And you're telling this court you have no proof you were ever actually there? I was there. I conducted a thorough inspection. Then explain this. Webb displayed the timeline Ethan had built. Westfield's attorney referenced your findings in a letter dated 7 days before your alleged inspection. How did they know what you would find before you found it? That must be an error in the letter's date. The letter is postmarked April 21st. The postmark doesn't lie. Webb moved closer. You didn't inspect that property on April 28th, did you, Mr. Vance? You wrote a report describing deficiencies that Westfield needed to exist, and you backdated it to make it look legitimate. That's absurd. I would never. Then produce evidence of your inspection, photographs, field notes, anything that proves you were actually there measuring actual cracks. Vance's composure was cracking. I don't have to prove anything. My professional reputation speaks for itself. Your professional reputation is exactly what's on trial here. Webb gestured to Ethan's comprehensive documentation. Mr. Cole spent 12 hours at that property during a severe storm. He documented every measurement with time-stamped photographs. He recorded data with precision that allows independent verification. He built a case that can withstand any level of scrutiny. He paused. You built a case that collapses the moment someone actually looks at the structure. Why is that? My findings are based on professional judgment. Professional judgment that contradicts physical reality? Webb pulled up another comparison. Vance's water damage claims beside Ethan's moisture readings. You claimed extensive water damage throughout the basement. Mr. Cole found none. You claimed active flooding. He found a dry, well-maintained space. You claimed $80,000 in necessary repairs. He found a foundation that needs routine sealing, costing perhaps $3,000. Webb's voice was quiet now, deadly. Either you're incompetent, Mr. Vance, or you're dishonest. Which is it? The courtroom was silent. Vance looked at Rourke, who was very carefully not looking back. Then he looked at the judge, and whatever he saw there made him deflate slightly. I may have overstated certain deficiencies, he said quietly. You may have overstated them? Webb's tone was incredulous. Mr. Vance, your report recommended immediate demolition. You claimed structural failure so severe it posed imminent danger. And now you're suggesting you merely overstated things? The structure showed signs of stress that could develop into serious problems if left unaddressed. Could develop and currently exists are very different claims. Webb pulled up the last damning piece of evidence, the timeline showing the letter predating the inspection. But the real problem is that you wrote conclusions before conducting an inspection. You fabricated findings to justify Westfield's acquisition strategy. That's not overstating, that's fraud. Objection! Rourke was on his feet. Your Honor, counsel is making allegations without proof. The proof is in the timeline, Webb said calmly. The proof is in the measurements. The proof is in the 40 pages of documentation, Mr. Cole provided that systematically contradicts every substantive claim in Mr. Vance's report. He turned back to Vance. Unless you can produce evidence that your inspection actually occurred when you claimed, that your measurements reflect reality, that your conclusions are based on actual structural analysis rather than corporate need, this court has no choice but to conclude your report is fraudulent. Vance said nothing. The silence stretched, became crushing, finally broke when the judge leaned forward. Mr. Vance, I'm going to ask you directly. Did you conduct a physical inspection of the Hart property on April 28th, as stated in your report? Vance looked at her, then at Rourke, then down at his hands. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. I conducted a preliminary assessment based on exterior observation and historical data. The interior inspection was not completed due to Ms. Hart's refusal to provide access. So you wrote a report describing interior structural deficiencies without actually examining the interior structure? I based my conclusions on reasonable extrapolation. You based your conclusions on nothing. The judge's voice was cold. Mr. Vance, I've been on the bench for 23 years. I've seen expert witnesses shade the truth, overstate certainty, present opinions as facts. But I have never seen someone present fabricated data as professional engineering analysis. She looked at Rourke. Does Westfield have any other evidence supporting emergency condemnation? Rourke stood slowly. Your Honor, if we could request a continuance to allow for an additional independent assessment. No. The judge's tone was final. Westfield has had months to build this case. You've presented a fraudulent report as the foundation for seizing someone's home. The only reason we're here today is that Ms. Hart found an engineer with enough integrity to tell the truth. She glanced at Ethan. And apparently enough courage to withstand your attempts at intimidation. She turned to Lena. Ms. Hart, based on the evidence presented, I'm denying Westfield's motion for emergency condemnation. Mr. Cole's assessment clearly demonstrates that your property is structurally sound and poses no imminent danger. This hearing is concluded. The gavel came down. For a moment, no one moved. Then Lena made a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and turned to Webb with tears streaming down her face. He gripped her shoulder, smiled, said something Ethan couldn't hear over the sudden noise of Westfield's legal team packing up with sharp, angry movements. Ethan stood frozen, the weight of what had just happened settling on him like a physical thing. They'd won, not just stopped the condemnation, but exposed the fraud, destroyed Vance's credibility, put Westfield in a position where continuing their harassment would be professional suicide. They'd actually won. Lena broke away from Webb and crossed to him, moving fast, and before Ethan could process what was happening, she'd wrapped her arms around him. He stood stiff for a heartbeat, aware of Rourke watching with calculating eyes, aware that this was exactly the kind of moment that would feed the narrative of personal involvement. Then he stopped caring and hugged her back. Thank you, she whispered against his shoulder. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You did this, he said quietly. You held the line for 6 months. All I did was document the truth. She pulled back, wiping her eyes. You did a lot more than that. You risked everything, your reputation, your relationship with your daughter, your safety. For a stranger. You're not a stranger anymore. The words hung between them, heavy with implications neither seemed ready to explore. Webb interrupted, practical as ever. We should leave before Westfield regroups. They're going to want to discuss settlement, damage control, possibly counter-litigation. I'd rather have those conversations on our terms. They walked out together, through courthouse halls still processing the morning's drama. Outside, the sun was shining with the kind of brightness that felt absurd after everything that had happened. Ethan checked his phone, 11 a.m. He could be home by 2, spend the afternoon with Jamie, pretend for a few hours that his life was simple and uncomplicated, except it wasn't. Not anymore. What happens now? Lena asked, standing next to his truck. Legally, I mean. And Westfield will probably attempt settlement, Webb said. They'll want to avoid litigation over the fraudulent report. We'll negotiate compensation for the harassment, legal fees, and damages. They'll agree to leave you alone in exchange for you agreeing not to pursue fraud charges against Vance. What if I want to pursue charges? Webb smiled slightly. Then we have that conversation. But my professional advice is to take the settlement, rebuild your life, and let Vance's destroyed credibility be punishment enough. Lena looked at Ethan. What do you think? I think you've been fighting for 6 months and you deserve peace. He paused. But I also think people like Westfield only stop when there are consequences. If you let them walk away with a settlement, they'll do this to someone else. So I should fight. I'm saying you've earned the right to choose. Fight or settle, either way, you've already won what matters. You kept your home. She studied him for a long moment, something shifting in her expression. Come with me. Back to the house. I want to show you something. Ethan glanced at his phone again, calculating drive times and promises made to Jamie. Lena, I need to get back to Boston. 1 hour, please. Her voice was soft but insistent. After everything, I need you to see this. He should say no, should get in his truck and drive away from whatever complication this was becoming, should protect the clean narrative where he'd done a good deed and return to his uncomplicated life. Instead, he heard himself say, 1 hour. They drove separately, Ethan following Lena's car through streets still littered with storm debris, past houses showing various levels of damage. Her property looked better in daylight than it had during the storm, still showing the roof breach under its tarp covering, still bearing scars from the night of violence, but standing, defiant. She led him inside, through rooms he'd fought to protect, into the kitchen where they'd shared coffee while the storm raged. Then through a door he hadn't noticed before, down a hallway lined with photographs. My parents, she said, gesturing to the images. A young couple standing in front of bare land. The same couple, older, standing beside framing lumber. Building the house with their own hands, room by room, year by year. The final photo showed them on the finished porch, arms around each other, proud and tired and complete. They died 2 weeks after that picture was taken, Lena said quietly. Car accident, drunk driver, wrong place, wrong time. 1 minute I had a family, the next minute I had a house full of memories and no idea how to keep it. I'm sorry. Everyone's sorry. Sorry doesn't pay mortgages or fight corporations. She moved down the hall to another door, opened it. But this does. The room beyond was a workshop, drafting table, architectural tools, shelves of materials and models. A space frozen in time, waiting for its owner to return. My mother's studio, Lena explained. She says she was an architect. Brilliant, according to everyone who worked with her. She designed this house, drew every plan, calculated every measurement. She picked up a set of drawings from the table, hands reverent. After she died, I couldn't touch anything in here. It felt like disturbing a grave. She spread the drawings out, plans for an addition to the house, beautifully detailed, never built. She was going to expand, add a second story, create studio space for both of them to work. They'd saved for years, had permits approved, materials ordered. Then they died, and I canceled everything because I couldn't bear to finish what they'd started. Lena looked at Ethan. But watching you work during the storm, seeing how you understood structure the way my mother did, how you fought for this building like it mattered, it made me realize something. What? That keeping their house exactly as they left it isn't honoring their memory. It's embalming it. She touched the drawings gently. They built this place to be lived in, changed, grown into. My mother would hate that I've been treating it like a museum instead of a home. Ethan studied the plans, seeing the vision, the skill, the love embedded in every line. These are beautiful. Your mother was incredibly talented. She was, and she would have liked you. Lena smiled slightly. She always said the best engineers understood that buildings weren't just structures. They were containers for lives. You proved that when you stayed to fight. You didn't just protect construction, you protected what the construction meant. Lena, I want to build it, she said suddenly. The addition. Finish what they started, and I want you to help me. The request landed like a physical blow. I can't. I have a daughter, responsibilities in Boston, not as a contractor, as a consultant. She pulled out another set of plans, these ones fresh, drawn in her own hand. I've been teaching myself architecture from my mother's books. I'm not certified, can't work professionally, but I can design, and I think maybe I could turn this house into something that honors their memory while creating my own future. She looked at him directly. But I need someone who understands structural engineering to verify my work. Make sure I'm not designing beautiful disasters. There are local engineers who could... I don't want a local engineer. I want someone I trust. Someone who's already proven they'll tell me the truth even when it's difficult. She paused. I'm not asking you to move here or abandon your daughter. I'm asking if you'd be willing to consult remotely, review plans, maybe visit occasionally to inspect progress. I'd pay professional rates, everything formal and documented. Ethan looked at the drawings, at this woman who'd survived 6 months of corporate warfare and come out fighting, at the opportunity she was offering to be part of something being built instead of something being defended. I need to think about it, he said finally. Of course. Take all the time you need. She gathered the plans carefully. I just wanted you to know the option exists, that this doesn't have to be the end of... She paused, searching for words, of whatever this is. The weight of that hung between them, all the unspoken implications of what had happened during the storm, what had grown during the battle, what might exist if they let it. Ethan's phone buzzed. Angela. Jamie's asking when you'll be home. Should I tell her dinner? Reality, pulling him back. I need to go. Long drive, and I promised my daughter... I know. Go. Lena walked him to the door, stopped on the porch. Ethan, thank you for everything. For staying when you could have left. For fighting when you could have taken the easy money. For caring about a stranger's house like it mattered. It did matter. It does. He hesitated. The consulting work, I'll think about it, seriously. That's all I'm asking. He drove away for the second time, watching her house disappear in his rearview mirror, and tried to sort through the tangle of emotions that had nothing to do with structural engineering and everything to do with the woman standing on that porch. The drive back to Boston gave him too much time to think. About Lena's offer, which was professional and reasonable and absolutely terrifying in its implications. About what consulting remotely would mean. Regular contact, ongoing connection, a relationship that extended beyond crisis into something sustained and deliberate. About whether he was ready for that. He made it home by 3, found Jamie and Angela making cookies in the kitchen, flour everywhere, and laughter filling the space. Jamie saw him and shrieked, running to him with sticky hands that immediately attached to his shirt. You're back! Did you win? Did you save the lady's house? We won, he confirmed, lifting her up despite the protesting muscles from too little sleep and too much stress. The house is safe. Because you're a hero. Because we told the truth and someone listened. Angela caught his eye over Jamie's head, read something in his expression, and raised an eyebrow in question. He shook his head slightly. Not now, later. And she nodded, understanding. They finished the cookies together, had an early dinner, played games until Jamie's bedtime. Normal things, family things. The life he'd built in the ruins of his first life, the one that had shattered when his wife died and left him alone with a 2-year-old and no idea how to be enough for her. After Jamie was asleep, Angela found him on the back porch, staring at nothing. You want to talk about it? She asked, settling into the chair beside him. I don't know what to talk about. How about why you look like someone who won a battle but isn't celebrating? Ethan smiled despite himself. That obvious? You drove 6 hours, testified in court, destroyed a fraudulent report, saved a woman's home, and came back looking more conflicted than relieved. She waited. What happened? He told her. About Lena's offer, about the consulting work, about the addition she wanted to build, and the role she wanted him to play in building it. About the way it felt like a door opening to something he wasn't sure he was ready to walk through. Angela listened without interrupting, the way she always did when he needed to talk through complications. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Do you want to do it?" she asked finally. "I don't know. The work itself would be interesting, challenging, the kind of project that reminds me why I became an engineer in the first place. But it means staying connected to her. To someone I barely know who's already become important in ways I don't entirely understand." He ran a hand through his hair. "Jamie's my priority. She has to be. Getting involved in a long-term consulting project, staying connected to Lena, it feels selfish. Or it feels like having a life beyond single parenthood. I have a life. You have a daughter and a career. That's not the same as having a life." Angela's voice was gentle. "Ethan, you've been surviving since Sarah died. Working, raising Jamie, getting through days. But you haven't been living, not really. Jamie needs a father who's present and engaged and whole, not one who's sacrificing everything on the altar of perfect parenthood." She touched his arm. "This woman, Lena, she's offering you work you care about, a project that matters. Maybe a connection that could become something more. Why does that have to be a betrayal of Jamie? Because every hour I spend on Lena's project is an hour away from my daughter. Every hour you spend at any job is an hour away from Jamie. At least this job makes you come alive in a way I haven't seen in years." He wanted to argue, but she wasn't wrong. The work with Lena, fighting for her house, building the case, standing up to Westfield, had engaged something in him that routine assessments never touched. Purpose, connection, the feeling of fighting for something that mattered beyond the next paycheck. "I'll think about it," he said finally. "Think fast. Something tells me she won't wait forever." That night, lying in bed unable to sleep, Ethan's phone buzzed with an email. "Lena, sending preliminary plans for the addition with a note. No pressure, but if you have time to review these, I'd value your input. Either way, thank you for today, for all the days. You changed my life." He opened the plans, intending just to glance, and found himself pulled into her vision. She'd taken her mother's original design and refined it, updated it, made it her own while honoring the foundation. The work was good, not professional yet, but showing real understanding of spatial relationships and structural logic. With guidance, with someone to verify her engineering assumptions, she could create something extraordinary. He could help her do that. Ethan started small. He sent Lena a detailed review of her preliminary plans 3 days after returning to Boston, keeping his feedback technical and professional. Load calculations needed adjustment on the second-floor addition. The stairwell design was elegant but would require structural reinforcement at the connection point. Her window placement maximized natural light but created lateral load concerns that needed addressing. She responded within hours, grateful and eager, asking questions that showed she was genuinely learning rather than just seeking validation. Their exchange stretched over several emails, then shifted to phone calls when text became too limiting for complex technical discussions. "The beam you're suggesting here," Lena said during their third call, "that changes the entire ceiling line in the main room. My mother's original design kept everything flush." Your mother's design was for a single-story addition. You're adding a second floor, which means different load paths and structural requirements." Ethan pulled up the plans on his laptop, making notes while Jamie colored at the kitchen table beside him. "You can keep the aesthetic your mother wanted, but it'll require a more complex beam configuration. More expensive, longer installation time. But possible? Everything's possible with enough engineering. The question is whether the added cost is worth preserving that specific detail." Lena was quiet for a moment. "It is. That ceiling line, my mother fought the contractor for 2 weeks to get it exactly right. She said architecture wasn't just about function, it was about the moments when you walk into a room and feel something shift inside you." A soft laugh. "I thought she was being dramatic. But standing in that room now, I get it. The proportions matter, the details matter. Then we make it work." Ethan sketched a revised beam configuration, solving the problem even as he recognized how easily he'd shifted from you to we without meaning to. The calls became regular. Twice a week at first, then 3 times, then nearly daily as Lena's plans evolved from preliminary sketches into construction-ready documents. Ethan found himself looking forward to their conversations, to the way her mind worked through spatial problems, to her willingness to challenge his assumptions when something didn't feel right aesthetically. "You're spending a lot of time on the phone lately," Angela observed one evening, after Ethan had spent 90 minutes discussing window specifications while making dinner one-handed. "It's a complex project, lots of technical details to work through." "Uh-huh." Angela's tone was knowing. "And the fact that you smile every time she calls has nothing to do with it?" "I'm not—" He stopped, caught. "It's professional. Professional consultants don't usually take calls during family dinner, or stay up until midnight reviewing plans, or check their email every 30 minutes hoping for updates." She paused. "I'm not criticizing. I'm just observing that this feels like more than a standard consulting job." She was right, and they both knew it. What had started as technical review had evolved into something closer to collaboration, with Ethan contributing design ideas alongside structural verification. He'd catch himself thinking about Lena's project during routine inspections, mentally solving problems she hadn't asked him to solve, getting invested in outcomes beyond his professional responsibility. "I like the work," he said finally. "It reminds me why I got into this field. Building something instead of just assessing what already exists." "And the woman doing the building? Do you like her too?" Ethan set down his spatula, faced his sister directly. "I barely know her. You spent 12 hours fighting a storm together. You risked your career defending her home. You talk to her nearly every day." Angela's expression was gentle. "That's not barely knowing someone. That's connection. And it's okay to acknowledge it. Jamie's my priority. Jamie is thriving. She's happy, healthy, doing great in school, surrounded by people who love her." Angela moved closer. "You've been a wonderful father, but you're also allowed to be a person beyond parenthood, allowed to care about someone, allowed to explore what that might mean." "It's too complicated. She's 3 hours away, we've known each other less than a month. There's a 7-year-old who doesn't need her father's attention divided, or there's a 7-year-old who would benefit from seeing her father happy and engaged with life beyond survival mode." Angela squeezed his shoulder. "Just think about it, and maybe stop pretending you're not already halfway there." The following week, Westfield's settlement offer arrived. Marcus Webb called Lena with the details, then conferenced Ethan in since his testimony had been crucial to their negotiating position. "They're offering $250,000, Webb said, full compensation for legal fees, documented harassment costs, and general damages. In exchange, you agree to release all claims against Westfield Development and Richard Vance, and sign a non-disclosure agreement preventing you from discussing the case publicly." "That's it?" Lena's voice was tight. "They tried to steal my home with fraudulent evidence, and they think $250,000 makes it disappear." "It's actually a strong offer given the circumstances. Most harassment settlements in property cases run $50,000 to $75,000. But it lets them walk away. Lets Vance keep his license, lets Westfield keep operating, lets them do this to the next person who can't afford to fight back." Webb sighed. "I understand the frustration, but pursuing litigation would take years and cost most of what you'd potentially win. The settlement gives you resources to rebuild, move forward, create the life you want. Sometimes that's more valuable than revenge." "It's not about revenge. It's about accountability." "Which you achieved. Vance's credibility is destroyed. Westfield's legal team knows their acquisition strategy failed. You won, Lena. This is what winning looks like. Not perfect justice, but enough to build something better." After the call ended, Lena called Ethan directly. "Tell me what to do," she said without preamble. "I can't tell you what to do. This is your decision. But you have an opinion." He did. "Take the settlement. Use the money to build your mother's addition. Create the architecture practice you're clearly meant to have. Move forward. Webb's right. Litigation would consume years of your life fighting people who've already lost. Don't give them that power." "What if they do this to someone else?" "Then that person will fight their own battle. You can't save everyone, Lena. Sometimes you have to save yourself first." She was quiet for a long time. "You're right. I hate it, but you're right." A pause. "The settlement money. It's enough to fund the construction project. More than enough, actually." "Good. You deserve that. deserve to build something instead of constantly defending what you have. Will you still consult, even though the immediate crisis is over? The question carried weight beyond its professional surface. Ethan knew what she was really asking, whether his involvement had been tied to the emergency or whether it meant something more sustained. Yes, he said. If you want me involved, I'm involved. I want you involved. Her voice was soft. In the project. In whatever this is we're building. Whatever this is we're building. The phrase resonated, heavy with possibility and uncertainty in equal measure. 3 weeks later, Lena accepted the settlement. Westfield paid within days, clearly eager to close the chapter before more scrutiny could damage their reputation. Vance quietly retired, his engineering license technically intact, but his credibility in ruins. The whole ugly situation resolved with the kind of speed that only happened when powerful people wanted something to disappear. It's done, Lena told Ethan over the phone. I'm officially $250,000 richer and legally forbidden from ever talking about why. How do you feel? Like I survived something that should have destroyed me. Like I can finally breathe. A pause. Like I'm ready to start building instead of fighting. When do you want to break ground on the addition? I was thinking early June. That gives me time to finalize permits, line up contractors, get all the structural engineering approved. Another pause. Longer this time. I was also thinking you should come up before then, see the site in person, review the final plans with me on location, meet the contractor who will be executing your structural specifications. That makes sense from a project management standpoint. It does, but that's not why I'm asking. Lena's voice was steady but vulnerable. I'm asking because I miss you, because phone calls and emails aren't enough anymore, because I want to see you outside of crisis mode and find out if what we built during the storm can exist in normal daylight. Ethan's heart hammered against his ribs. This was the moment Angela had warned him about, the point where professional connection either stayed professional or became something more, where he had to decide if he was ready to risk the careful balance he'd built with Jamie, to complicate his carefully managed life with something unpredictable and potentially profound. I miss you too, he heard himself say. And yes, I'll come up. We'll figure out what this is. When? He checked his calendar, calculated Jamie's school schedule and Angela's availability. 2 weeks from Saturday, I can drive up in the morning, spend the day, drive back Sunday. Or you could stay overnight, there's a guest room. She said it casually, but they both knew the implications. No pressure, just an option. Let me figure out the logistics and let you know. After they hung up, Ethan sat staring at his phone, processing what he'd just agreed to. A site visit was reasonable, professional, exactly what a good consultant would do. But they both knew it was also a first date disguised as a business meeting, a chance to discover if the connection they'd built under extreme circumstances could translate into something sustainable. He found Angela in the living room, told her about the plan. She smiled that knowing smile that meant she'd seen this coming from miles away. You'll need someone to watch Jamie overnight if you're staying, she said. I'm available. So is Mom, probably. I haven't decided if I'm staying. Ethan, you're going to stay. Stop pretending otherwise. What do I tell Jamie? The truth. That you're visiting a friend, working on a project, and you'll be back Sunday. Angela's expression turned serious. She's not fragile. She doesn't need you to be perfect or constantly present. She needs you to be honest and happy and engaged with your own life. This, whatever it becomes with Lena, that's part of being engaged. The 2 weeks passed in a blur of work and planning and conversations with Lena that grew progressively less about architecture and more about everything else. He learned she'd studied art history in college before switching to business when her parents died, and she needed practical skills to survive. That she played piano badly, but enthusiastically. That she'd been engaged once, years ago, to someone who'd wanted her to sell the house and move to the city, and when she'd refused, he'd left. He said I was choosing a building over a future, she told Ethan during one late-night call. But he didn't understand it wasn't the building, it was what the building represented. My parents' legacy, my connection to them, the proof that they existed and mattered and built something beautiful. A pause. You understood that immediately. During the storm, you fought for my house like you knew exactly what it meant. Because I did know. Buildings aren't just structures. They're containers for our lives, our memories, our proof that we were here. Is that why you became an engineer? Ethan thought about it. I became an engineer because I needed stability and decent income after my wife died. But I stayed an engineer because there's something profound about understanding how things stand up under pressure, how to build foundations that hold even when everything else is falling apart. You're talking about more than buildings. Maybe. The night before his visit, Ethan couldn't sleep. He lay in bed running through scenarios, trying to predict how the weekend would unfold, whether the chemistry they'd built through crisis would survive normal circumstances, whether he was ready for what might happen if it did. Jamie found him at the kitchen table at 6 a.m., drinking coffee and staring at nothing. "You're nervous," she observed, climbing into the chair beside him. "How can you tell?" "You get this line between your eyebrows when you're worried about something." She touched the spot with one small finger. "Are you scared to see the lady again?" Out of the mouths of 7-year-olds. "A little." "Yeah." "Why?" "You like her." "How do you know I like her?" "Because you smile when you talk to her on the phone, and you've been happy lately. Happier than usual." Jamie tilted her head, studying him with unsettling perception. "It's okay if you like her, Daddy. I want you to be happy." Ethan felt his throat close. "You make me happy, Bug." "I know. But maybe you can have more than one kind of happy." She said it so simply, as if solving the equation that had been tormenting him for weeks. "Aunt Angela says people have big enough hearts for lots of love. You loving the lady doesn't mean you love me less." "When did you get so wise?" "I've always been wise. You just don't always listen." She grinned, pleased with herself. "Go see her. Find out if she makes you the happy kind that stays." He left after breakfast, driving the now familiar route with a mixture of anticipation and dread churning in his stomach. The landscape had changed since the storm, trees budding, winter's damage cleaned up, everything shifting toward spring and renewal. Appropriate, he supposed, for whatever this was becoming. Lena was waiting on the porch when he arrived, and the sight of her did something complicated to his breathing. She'd cut her hair shorter, was wearing jeans and a paint-stained shirt that suggested she'd been working on the house. And when she smiled, the whole world seemed to shift slightly on its axis. "You made it," she said, coming down the steps to meet him. "I did." He got out of the truck, suddenly awkward in a way he hadn't been during their phone conversations. "The drive was good. Weather held. Very different from last time you were here. Significantly less dramatic." They stood looking at each other for a moment that stretched just past comfortable, both of them clearly aware they were navigating new territory. Then Lena laughed, breaking the tension. "This is weird, isn't it? We've talked for hours, worked together through a crisis, but now that you're actually here, it feels like a first date where neither of us knows the script." "It is a first date, just one disguised as a site inspection. So should we inspect the site first and date later? Or date first to get the awkwardness out of the way?" "Let's start with the site. At least there I know what I'm doing." They walked the property together, Lena showing him where the addition would connect to the existing structure, explaining her vision for how interior and exterior space would flow together. Ethan assessed the foundation points, the grade of the land, the proximity to setback lines, translating her artistic vision into structural realities. "The contractor says we'll need to pour new foundation piers here and here," Lena said, pointing to marked locations. "But I'm worried about disrupting the root system of that oak tree. Is there a way to adjust the foundation plan without compromising structural integrity?" They spent 20 minutes solving the problem, Ethan sketching alternate pier placements while Lena evaluated how each option affected her design aesthetic. It was easy, natural, the kind of collaboration where both parties brought essential skills to create something neither could achieve alone. "You're really good at this," Ethan said as she refined his sketch with improved spatial flow. "The architecture, I mean. You have genuine talent. I had a good teacher and a good consultant." She looked up at him. "This project, it's not just about building my mother's addition anymore. It's become something I need to do for myself. Proof that I can create something, not just defend what someone else built." "You've already proven that. You survived Westfield's assault and came out stronger." "I survived, but I want to do more than survive. I want to build a life I chose, not one that was just left to me." She paused. "Does that make sense?" "Complete sense." They finished the site inspection by early afternoon, then went inside where Lena had lunch waiting. Sandwiches, fruit, iced tea, simple but thoughtful. They ate in the kitchen where they'd shared coffee during the storm, and the familiarity of the space made conversation easier. "Tell me about Jamie," Lena said. "You talk about her constantly, but I feel like I only know the outline." So he told her. About Jamie's fierce intelligence and terrible jokes, her stubborn independence inherited from her mother, the way she'd learned to be resilient because life had demanded it. About the guilt he carried for every missed bedtime and school event, the constant calculation of whether he was doing enough or failing despite his best efforts. "You're a good father," Lena said when he finished. "That's obvious from how you talk about her, but you're also allowed to have a life beyond fatherhood." "That's what my sister keeps saying. Your sister is smart. Listen to her." Lena reached across the table, took his hand. The contact was electric, simple touch becoming profound connection. "I'm not asking you to choose between your daughter and whatever this is. I'm just asking if there's room in your life for both." "I don't know if I'm good at both. I've spent 5 years focused entirely on being a single parent. The idea of adding relationship complexity, it scares me." "It scares me too. I've spent 6 months fighting just to keep what I have. The idea of opening myself to someone, risking that kind of vulnerability again, terrifying." She squeezed his hand. "But I think maybe the scary things are the ones worth doing." They talked through the afternoon, conversation flowing easily from heavy topics to light ones and back again. Lena told him about her failed engagement, about choosing the house over the relationship and never quite regretting it even when she was lonely. Ethan talked about the early years after Sarah died, when every day felt like drowning, and Jamie was the only thing keeping him afloat. "I used to think I'd never feel anything for anyone again," he admitted. "That I'd used up my capacity for that kind of connection, and what remained was just going through the motions for Jamie's sake. And now? Now I think maybe I was just protecting myself. Safer to be numb than risk being broken again." He met her eyes. "But then a storm happened, and I met someone who reminded me that broken things can be repaired. That fighting for something worth keeping isn't foolish, it's necessary." "We're not talking about the house anymore, are we?" "No." The sun was setting, painting the kitchen in golden light, and Lena stood slowly. "Come with me. I want to show you something." She led him upstairs to her mother's studio, to the drafting table covered with plans. But these weren't the addition plans they'd been working on. These were new designs, sketches of a different kind of project. "I've been thinking," Lena said, "about what happens after the addition is complete. About what I want to do with my life beyond just maintaining my parents' legacy." She pulled out a portfolio of drawings, small residential projects, renovation concepts, adaptive reuse designs. "I want to start my own architecture practice. Small scale, focused on preservation and thoughtful addition rather than new construction, taking existing structures and helping them evolve." The drawings were beautiful, showing real understanding of how old and new could coexist harmoniously. "Lena, these are incredible. They're rough. I'd need to partner with a licensed architect initially, work under their supervision until I can get my own credentials. But I think maybe this is what I'm meant to do, what my mother was training me for without either of us realizing it. You should do it. Absolutely do it." "Here's the thing," she turned to face him fully. "I'd need a structural engineer I trust. Someone who understands that buildings aren't just problems to solve, they're stories to preserve. Someone willing to consult on small projects that won't make much money but might matter in other ways." Understanding dawned. "You're asking me to be your permanent consultant. I'm asking if you'd consider it. Long-term partnership, profit sharing on projects, formal business arrangement with all the professional boundaries that requires." She paused. "But I'm also asking if you'd consider the personal partnership that might exist alongside the professional one. Because I think we're building something here, Ethan. Something that started during a storm and kept growing when we should have walked away from each other. He should think about it rationally. Should consider logistics, complications, the impact on Jamie, the risk of mixing professional and personal relationships. Should be practical and cautious and protected." Instead, he kissed her. It was gentle at first, tentative. Two people discovering a physical chemistry matched emotional connection. Then Lena's hands came up to his face, and his arms wrapped around her waist, and the kiss deepened into something that felt like inevitability and choice in equal measure. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Lena laughed softly. So that's a yes to the consulting partnership? That's a yes to figuring this out. All of it. The professional collaboration and the personal connection and how to make both work when we live 3 hours apart and have complicated lives. We'll need rules, boundaries, clear separation between business and personal so neither destroys the other. Agreed. We'll be smart about this. And you'll need to introduce me to Jamie at some point. If this becomes serious, she needs to be part of the equation. The thought terrified and warmed him simultaneously. She already knows about you. Asked me this morning if you make me the happy kind that stays. And? Do I? Ethan pulled her close again, resting his forehead against hers. I think you might, if we don't screw this up. Then let's try very hard not to screw it up. They spent the evening making plans, both architectural and personal. The addition would break ground in June, providing a trial run for their professional partnership. They'd visit each other monthly, alternating who traveled, making sure Jamie was comfortable with the arrangement before increasing the frequency. They'd keep business and personal as separate as possible, with clear communication when boundaries blurred. It was practical and reasonable, and absolutely insane to be planning a relationship with someone he'd known for less than 2 months. But standing in Lena's kitchen, watching her sketch modifications to her mother's plans while occasionally looking up to smile at him, it felt right in a way that bypassed logic entirely. Around 10, Lena showed him to the guest room, a space she'd clearly prepared carefully, with fresh sheets and a stack of towels, and a level of thoughtfulness that made his chest ache. They stood in the doorway, neither quite ready to separate for the night. I'm glad you came, she said softly. Me too. And I'm glad you're staying. Me too. She kissed him once more, gentle and full of promise, then retreated to her own room down the hall. Ethan lay in the guest bed, listening to the old house settle around him, thinking about all the ways his life was about to become complicated and difficult and potentially wonderful. His phone buzzed with a text from Angela. How's it going? Good, really good. Complicated, but good. Are you staying the night? Yes, good. You deserve this, whatever it becomes. He fell asleep thinking about Jamie's words, that people had big enough hearts for lots of love, that him loving Lena didn't mean loving his daughter less, hoping she was right, believing for the first time in 5 years that maybe she was. Morning came with sunlight and the smell of coffee. Ethan found Lena in the kitchen already dressed, breakfast laid out with the same thoughtfulness she'd shown the night before. I didn't know what you liked, she said, gesturing to the spread of options, so I made everything. They ate together, comfortable in a way that suggested last night's decisions had settled something between them. Then they spent the morning doing a final review of the construction timeline, making sure every structural specification was documented and approved. The contractor wants to start the first week of June, Lena said, checking her notes. Foundation work first, then framing, then we can start thinking about interior finishes. I can come up for the foundation pour, make sure everything's level and properly reinforced before they build on it. You don't have to. I want to. This is important work and I want to see it done right. He paused. Plus, it gives me an excuse to see you again in 3 weeks instead of a month. She smiled. I won't complain about that. He left after lunch, promising to send updated structural calculations by Wednesday, agreeing to a video call with Jamie later in the week so she could meet Lena in a low-pressure way. The drive back to Boston felt different from any previous trip, lighter, full of possibility instead of obligation. Angela took one look at his face when he got home and knew immediately. So it's happening, you and Lena. We're figuring it out, slowly, carefully. But it's happening. Yeah, it's happening. Jamie wanted a full report, asking dozens of questions about Lena's house and the addition plans and whether Ethan had fun. He answered honestly, watching her process the information with that serious expression she got when thinking hard about something. Are you going to date her? She asked finally. Maybe, if that's okay with you. It's definitely okay, but I want to meet her first. Make sure she's nice. She is nice. But yes, you can meet her. Soon. Good. Jamie went back to her coloring, the matter apparently settled in her mind. I'm glad you found someone who makes you smile like that. Over the following weeks, Ethan and Lena developed a rhythm. Professional calls about the construction project remained separate from personal calls about their lives, their hopes, the relationship they were building. He drove up for the foundation pour, brought Jamie with him this time, watched his daughter and Lena discover easy rapport over shared interest in art and building things. "I like her," Jamie announced on the drive home. "She's smart, and she listens when you talk, and she made you laugh like 4 times. Is that your approval?" "Total approval. You should definitely keep dating her." The foundation went in perfectly, contractor following Ethan's specifications exactly. The framing started in mid-June, walls rising to enclose the vision Lena had inherited from her mother and made her own. Ethan consulted remotely, reviewed photos and measurements, made adjustment recommendations that Lena implemented with growing confidence. By July, the structure was enclosed and they were discussing interior finishes. By August, Lena had filed paperwork to establish her architecture practice, partnering with a licensed architect in Boston who appreciated her talent and was willing to supervise her work toward independent licensure. By September, they had their first small client, an elderly couple wanting to add accessibility features to their historic home without destroying its character. And through it all, Ethan and Lena built their relationship with the same care they brought to structural engineering, slowly, thoughtfully, testing each connection before adding weight, making sure the foundation could support what they were creating. "I love you," Lena said one night in October, curled against him on her couch while rain fell outside. "I think I've loved you since the storm, but I wanted to be sure before I said it." "I love you too," Ethan replied, the words feeling simultaneously terrifying and right. "I didn't think I'd ever feel this way again. Didn't think I had space in my life for it." "And now?" "Now I think maybe love creates its own space, expands to fit what it needs to hold." They were still figuring out logistics, his life in Boston, hers building here, the 3-hour distance that complicated everything. But they were figuring it out together, making plans that included Jamie in every decision, building something that honored both their pasts and their potential future. The addition was completed in November, the week before Thanksgiving. Lena threw a small party to celebrate, just Ethan, Jamie, Angela, and Marcus Webb, the lawyer who'd fought beside them. They stood in the new studio space her mother had designed, looking at walls that had risen from vision to reality, and Lena raised a glass. "To everyone who helped make this happen, to fighting for what matters, to building something beautiful from broken pieces." They drank to that, and Ethan thought about how far they'd all come from that stormy night when everything had been chaos and crisis and desperate defense. How they'd turned survival into creation, fear into hope, endings into beginnings. Jamie tugged his sleeve, whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Are you going to ask her to marry you?" Ethan choked on his drink. Lena laughed until tears ran down her face. Angela just smiled knowingly. "Not yet, Bug," he said when he could breathe again. "But maybe someday." "Good," Jamie said, satisfied. "Because I like her, and I want to keep her." Later, after everyone had gone home and Jamie was asleep in Lena's guest room, Ethan and Lena stood together looking at the completed addition. The work had been hard, the timeline aggressive, the challenges constant. But they'd built something extraordinary. Not just walls and floors and ceilings, but proof that broken things could be repaired, that fighting was worth it, that choosing to stay and build was sometimes braver than walking away. "Thank you," Lena said quietly, "for everything. For staying during the storm, for fighting when you could have left, for building this with me. Thank you for letting me. For taking a chance on a burned-out engineer who showed up at the worst possible moment and stayed longer than he should have. Stayed exactly as long as he needed to." She leaned against him, both of them watching the stars through the new skylights her mother had envisioned decades ago. "Think we can keep doing this? Building things together? I think we can build anything we want, as long as we build it together." And standing there in the space they'd created from vision and determination and love that had started during a storm, Ethan believed it completely. The question hung in the air between them for exactly 3 heartbeats before reality crashed back in the form of Jamie yelling from the guest room that she couldn't find her stuffed bear. Ethan excused himself with an apologetic smile, and Lena watched him go, her own heart doing complicated things in her chest that had nothing to do with architecture and everything to do with the man who'd just tacitly admitted he was thinking about forever. The holidays came and went in a blur of shared traditions and new beginnings. Jamie insisted Lena join them for Christmas in Boston, and watching his daughter and the woman he loved decorate cookies together, while Angela provided running commentary, made Ethan's chest ache with gratitude for how unexpectedly his life had rearranged itself. By January, Lena's architecture practice had 3 active clients, all small renovation projects that required the kind of sensitive integration of old and new that she excelled at. Ethan consulted on each one, their professional partnership settling into comfortable efficiency. They'd learned each other's working styles, developed shorthand for technical discussions, built trust that extended beyond personal feelings into genuine professional respect. "I have a problem," Lena said during their weekly business call in late February. "Good problem, but still a problem." Ethan was reviewing foundation specs for a client's basement renovation, only half listening. "What kind of problem?" "I have more work than I can handle from here. My supervising architect wants me to take on a larger commercial renovation project. Historic building downtown being converted to mixed use. It's exactly the kind of work I want to be doing, but it would require me to be on site in Boston at least 3 days a week for the next 6 months. That got his full attention. Boston, as in significantly closer to Boston than you currently are. As in, I'd need to find temporary housing there, split my time between here and there, probably stay with Angela more than I'd be comfortable imposing, honestly. Ethan's mind raced through implications and possibilities. Or you could stay with me. We have space. Jamie would love it. Angela would definitely love not having a house guest. Ethan, we've been dating less than a year, moving in together, even part-time. That's a big step. We built an addition together, survived corporate fraud, established a successful business partnership. I think we can handle cohabitation. He paused. Unless you're not ready for that, which is fine. I'm not trying to pressure. I'm ready, she interrupted, terrified but ready. I just want to make sure Jamie's ready too. This affects her more than anyone. Let me talk to her. He found Jamie in her room doing homework, approached the conversation with the kind of careful honesty he'd learned was the only way to navigate important topics with his daughter. Bug, I need to talk to you about something. Lena has a work opportunity in Boston. She'd need to stay here a few days a week for the next several months. I was thinking she could stay with us instead of getting a hotel or imposing on Aunt Angela. Jamie looked up from her math worksheet, expression serious. Like, live here? In our house? Part-time, yes. She'd still have her own house upstate, would go back there on weekends, but during the week she'd be here. Would she stay in the guest room? Probably, yes. Ethan paused. How would you feel about that? Jamie was quiet for a moment, processing with the careful deliberation she brought to big questions. Would you be happier if she was here? I'd like having her close, yes, but only if you're comfortable with it. Would she help with stuff? Like, would she try to be a mom or just be Lena who's dating my dad? The question was more perceptive than he'd expected. Just Lena who's dating your dad. She's not trying to replace your mom. Nobody could do that. Good, because I only have one mom, even if she's not here anymore. Jamie went back to her math, then looked up again. But I like Lena. She's funny and she listens and she makes you happy. So yes, she can stay here as long as she knows I'm the boss of the house rules. Ethan laughed despite the emotion clogging his throat. I'll make sure she understands the chain of command. Lena moved in on a trial basis in March, bringing a suitcase of clothes and her laptop and a careful respect for the space that was theirs before it became shared. The first week was awkward, all of them navigating new dynamics and boundaries. But by the second week, something had settled. Lena worked from their dining room table, reviewing plans and talking to contractors while Jamie did homework beside her. She cooked dinner with Ethan on Wednesday nights, the 3 of them developing easy rhythms in the kitchen. She read to Jamie before bed when Ethan was running late, not trying to replace bedtime rituals, but adding to them. This is working, Angela observed one Sunday when she'd come by for brunch. She watched Lena and Jamie collaborating on a drawing project, heads together, laughing at some private joke. Better than I expected, actually. You had doubts? Ethan asked. I had concerns. Moving someone into your life is one thing. Moving them into Jamie's life is another. But Lena gets it. She's not trying to be her mother. She's just being herself. And Jamie responds to that authenticity. I want to ask her to marry me, Ethan said quietly. Angela didn't look surprised. When? I don't know. Soon. It feels right. But I want to make sure that Jamie's okay with it. You should ask her. So he did, that night after Lena had driven back upstate for the weekend. Jamie was in her pajamas, brushing her teeth, and Ethan leaned against the bathroom doorframe, feeling like he was about to take the most important exam of his life. Bug, can I ask you something serious? She spit toothpaste, rinsed, and turned to face him with the gravity the question deserved. Is this about marrying Lena? How did you... Dad, you look at her the way people look at each other in movies before they get married. Plus, Aunt Angela has been doing that smile she does when she knows a secret. Jamie crossed her arms. So, are you asking my permission? I'm asking how you'd feel about it, about Lena becoming part of our family officially. Jamie was quiet, really thinking about it. Would she move here all the time, not just part-time? We'd have to figure that out. But yes, eventually, if she said yes, we'd probably all live together. And would you have more kids? Because I wouldn't mind a sibling, but I also like being the only one. Ethan blinked. We haven't discussed that. But whatever happens, you'd be part of the conversation. Your feelings matter more than anything. Okay. Jamie nodded decisively. Then yes, you can marry her, but I want to help pick the ring, and I get to be in the wedding, not a flower girl because that's for little kids, but something important. Deal. He pulled her into a hug, overwhelmed by how thoroughly his 7-year-old had just given him permission to rebuild his life. Thank you, Bug. You're welcome. Now, can we get ice cream to celebrate? It's 8:30 on a school night. It's basically the weekend, please? They got ice cream. Finding the ring took 3 weeks and help from both Angela and Jamie, who had surprisingly strong opinions about diamond settings and band styles. He chose a simple design that reflected Lena's aesthetic. Elegant, understated, with clean lines that would age well. The jeweler promised it would be ready in 2 weeks, which gave Ethan time to plan something better than a spontaneous proposal. He decided on the house. Her house, where everything had started, where they'd fought through the storm and built something that had become the foundation for everything that followed. The addition was hosting its first event in late April, a small showcase for Lena's architecture practice, inviting potential clients to see her work firsthand. She'd been preparing for weeks, anxious about whether anyone would come, whether her vision would resonate, whether she was ready to fully step into this new professional identity. Ethan arranged with Angela to bring Jamie upstate for the event, ostensibly to support Lena, but actually to have his daughter present for what he hoped would be the most important question he'd ask in years. The ring box felt like it weighed 10 pounds in his jacket pocket. The showcase was a success. 20 people showed up, including several who expressed serious interest in commissioning work. Lena moved through the crowd with growing confidence, explaining her design philosophy, showing how the addition honored the original structure while creating new possibilities. Watching her inhabit this role she'd built for herself, Ethan felt pride that went bone deep. As the last guest filtered out, Lena found him on the porch, finally allowing herself to relax. I think it went well, she said, leaning against the railing. 3 solid leads, maybe 5 if you count the people who seemed interested but non-committal. It went better than well. You were brilliant. He moved closer. Your mother would have been proud. I like to think so. She looked at the house, at the addition that had grown from her mother's vision and her own determination. This place, it was supposed to be just a memory, something to preserve and protect, but you helped me see it could be more than that. Could be a foundation for building forward instead of just looking back. You did that yourself. I just provided structural support. You provided everything. She turned to face him fully. Ethan, I know we haven't talked about long-term plans explicitly, but I've been thinking, marry me. The words came out before he'd planned them, rushed and inelegant. Lena's eyes went wide. What? He pulled out the ring box, dropped to one knee on the porch where he had first met her almost exactly a year ago. Marry me. Move to Boston permanently, or stay here and I'll figure out how to make that work, or we'll find somewhere in between. I don't care about the logistics. I just know that I want to build the rest of my life with you. Want Jamie to have you as a permanent part of her world. Want to wake up next to you for the next 50 years and figure out how to make buildings stand up and raise a kid and maybe add to our family if that's something you want. He was rambling now, nervous. I'm not good at speeches, but I'm good at foundations. And you're mine. My foundation. The thing that keeps me standing even when everything else is chaos. Lena was crying, hands over her mouth, and for a terrible moment Ethan thought he'd miscalculated completely. Then she was nodding, laughing through tears. Yes. Yes, of course, yes. He slipped the ring on her finger with shaking hands, stood up, and kissed her while Jamie cheered from the window where she'd apparently been watching the whole thing. Angela appeared behind her, smiling that knowing smile, and the moment was perfect and chaotic and exactly right. I helped pick the ring, Jamie announced, running out onto the porch. Do you like it? I love it. Lena pulled Jamie into the embrace, the three of them standing together in the golden evening light. Thank you for sharing your dad with me. You're family now, Jamie said matter-of-factly, so you don't have to ask permission anymore. You just are. They spent that night making plans, not concrete ones yet, but dreams and possibilities and visions of how their lives would weave together. Lena would keep the house upstate as her primary office, but split her time between there and Boston. They'd get married in the fall, small ceremony, just family and close friends. Jamie would be the junior bridesmaid, a role she took very seriously. They'd figure out the rest as they went, building their future the way they'd built the addition, carefully, thoughtfully, with respect for what came before and excitement for what could be created. I never thought I'd have this, Lena said late that night, curled against Ethan in her bed. After my parents died, after my engagement fell apart, I convinced myself I was meant to be alone. That fighting for this house meant accepting loneliness as the price. And now? Now I think maybe I was just waiting for someone who understood that loving a building and loving a person aren't mutually exclusive, that you can honor the past while building toward the future. She played with the ring on her finger, still getting used to its weight. You gave me that. Permission to want both. You gave me permission to want anything at all. I'd gotten so used to just surviving, just getting through days for Jamie's sake, that I'd forgotten what it felt like to actually want something for myself. And what do you want? This. You. A life that's complicated and full and requires constant engineering to keep all the pieces balanced. He kissed her forehead. I want to build something with you that our kids and grandkids will walk through someday and know we did it right. The wedding happened in October, 1 year and 6 months after the storm that had brought them together. They held it at the house, naturally, in the backyard where foundation piers for the addition had been sunk into solid ground. Small gathering, Angela, Jamie, Marcus Webb, Lena's supervising architect, a handful of close friends. The ceremony was simple. Vows they'd written themselves about building and foundations, and choosing to stay when leaving would be easier. Jamie stood beside them as junior bridesmaid, holding the rings with the solemnity the role required. When Ethan and Lena exchanged their vows, his daughter smiled so widely it looked like her face might split, and he thought about how far they'd all come from that first terrible night of the storm. The reception spilled from house to yard, casual and full of laughter. Angela gave a toast about stubborn brothers who finally learned to take their own advice about standing up for what matters. Webb gave a toast about clients who reminded lawyers why they got into the profession in the first place. Jamie gave a toast about how her dad was way happier now, and could everyone please make sure he stayed that way. As the sun set and guests began filtering away, Ethan and Lena stood together looking at the house that had survived a storm and a corporate assault and had emerged stronger for both trials. Think we can keep doing this? Lena asked, echoing the question from months ago. Building things together? I think we can build anything, Ethan replied, echoing his answer. As long as we remember that the strongest structures aren't the ones that never face pressure. They're the ones that distribute the load properly, that flex instead of breaking, that know when to hold firm and when to adapt. You're talking about more than buildings again. Always. He pulled her close. But the principle holds. We build carefully, we support each other's weight, we make sure the foundation stays solid, even when everything else is shifting. Jamie ran over, grabbed both their hands. Come on, you have to cut the cake, and I get the first piece because I'm the most important person here. I thought I was the most important person, Lena said, feigning offense. You're tied for second with Dad, but I'm the kid, so I win. They cut the cake and ate too much and danced in the yard while twilight deepened into full dark. The house glowed with warm light behind them, windows showing the life they'd built inside, proof that fighting for what mattered wasn't foolish, it was essential. Later, much later, after Jamie had fallen asleep in the guest room and the last guests had departed, Ethan and Lena stood in the addition's studio space. Her mother's drawings still hung on the walls, but now they were joined by new work. Lena's own designs, client projects, dreams taking physical form. "I've been thinking about what comes next," Lena said. "The practice is growing faster than I expected. I'll need to hire help soon, maybe bring on another junior architect." "That's good news." "It is, but it also means making real decisions about where we base our lives. Boston makes sense professionally for both of us, but this house stays," Ethan finished. "We keep it, maintain it, use it as your primary office and our weekend retreat. We're engineers and architects. If anyone can make a split-location life work structurally, it's us." She laughed, always bringing it back to structure. Structure is everything. It's what lets buildings stand through storms, what lets families withstand pressure, what lets love survive all the complications we throw at it. He took her hands. "We've already proven we can build something that holds. Now we just keep building." And they did. Over the months and years that followed, they built a life that honored both their needs, splitting time between Boston and the lake house, raising Jamie with the kind of stability that came from knowing she was loved completely, growing Lena's architecture practice into something nationally recognized for sensitive historic preservation. They took on projects that mattered, fought for buildings that deserved saving, proved again and again that old and new could coexist when handled with skill and care. Jamie grew from 7 to 8 to 10, thriving under the attention of two parents who'd chosen each other and her with equal deliberation. When she was 12, they added to their family a son they named Marcus, after the lawyer who'd fought beside them, and a daughter 2 years later they named Sarah, honoring the woman whose loss had reshaped Ethan's understanding of what family could mean. The house by the lake stood through every season, its addition a testament to what vision and determination could create. Clients who visited Lena's practice saw the building and understood immediately what she could do. Take what existed and expand it thoughtfully, never erasing the past but always building toward the future. On the 20th anniversary of the storm, Ethan and Lena stood on the porch with their 3 children, looking at the house that had started everything. Jamie was 27 now, herself an engineer following in her father's footsteps. Marcus was 10, already showing signs of his mother's artistic sensibility. Sarah was 8, stubborn and brilliant and utterly convinced she could do anything. "Tell us the storm story again," Sarah demanded. "The one where Dad saved Mom's house." "Your mother saved her own house," Ethan corrected. "I just helped with the structural engineering." "That's not how Aunt Angela tells it," Jamie said. "She says you showed up in a storm, fell in love at first sight, and fought a corporation to win Mom's heart." "Aunt Angela has always had a flair for drama," Lena said, but she was smiling. "The truth is simpler. Sometimes the right person shows up at exactly the right moment, and sometimes you're brave enough to let them stay. And sometimes," Ethan added, pulling his wife close, "the scariest thing you can do is choose to build instead of just survive. But it's always worth it." They went inside together, into the house that had weathered storms both literal and metaphorical, that had been defended and expanded and filled with the kind of life its original builders had dreamed of. The foundation held, as it always had, as it always would, solid beneath their feet, supporting the weight of everything they'd built on top of it. And in the studio where Lena's mother had once drawn dreams, where Lena now created her own visions, the plans for their latest project waited. Another historic building needing sensitive care, another chance to prove that with the right foundation, anything could be built to last. The house stood. The family thrived. The work continued. And it was enough. More than enough. It was everything.